ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera. Tonight, we'll be speaking about mysterious places, monsters, and the Count Dracula. I know a lot of you are familiar with the Dracula movies with Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., those kind of things. Is that Hollywood fantasy? Is that something just for our entertainment? Or do vampires really exist? Tonight, we're going to answer that question. Ed, I'd like to ask you about vampires just to start right off. Are there such a thing as vampires, and can you tell me an example of one?
Positively. Vampires do exist, what we call human vampires. The human vampire is a person who hallucinates, imagines himself as a vampire, and takes on that role. These are not the true Hollywood-type vampire, but there are cases, such as the Calbani case back in 1953 in Old Greenwich Farm Cemetery, where the Calbani family had to open up a grave, and a family member had died, and they were saving a little money by digging the grave themselves. When they got down about 4 foot, they struck a coffin which shouldn't be there. It was their private plot. The coffin was of an antique nature. They opened it up, and inside was a man about 45 years old, and he was fresh to the touch as though he had just been buried. Now, the law states that even though it's your plot in the cemetery, you can't exhume the body until you get a court order. Well, it took about a week to get that court order. In the meantime, the mother of the family went back and had the ground consecrated. And then they dug up the grave again, and this time, when they opened it up, inside was a corpse that looked as though it had been buried for many, many years, just a skeleton. The coffin itself had greatly deteriorated. At the time, it made quite a hullabaloo in the newspapers, and people wondered, was this a vampire? Well, it was a vampire, but the man was not dead when he was put into that coffin. He was a sorcerer, a black magician. He had put himself into a catatonic state, still alive, just barely. Friends of his had him buried, but at night he would leave that coffin with the astral body, very much the same way that people who are on a operating table leave their physical body, look down and see the doctors and the nurses. This man would leave, right, this man would leave during the psychic hours, 9 to 6, and he would go in search of blood, but he would not bite into anybody's neck. He could take the blood through what we call teleportation, apports. Now today, of course, with all the ways that somebody could get blood, a vampire doesn't have to attack anybody to get that blood. But while the physical body is still alive, there's a silver cord, a supernatural cord, that emanates from the physical body to the astral body. No matter how far away that astral body goes, if you go 3,000 miles, that cord would still be attached. It's only when that cord, that supernatural cord, is broken that death comes to that physical body. The blood that the vampire would get would be transferred through that cord, that silver cord, much like a straw, would go back into the physical body, which was in the grave, and this would rejuvenate the body and keep it alive. That's a true vampire today. But, you know, a lot of people wonder about Count Dracula. Well, now we're going to Transylvania.
Is there such a place as Transylvania? There is, isn't there?
Transylvania is part of Romania. It's in the Carpathian Mountains. In fact, we want to plan a trip probably next year going to the Carpathian Mountains and seeing what's left of Dracula's castle.
Oh, wow. And
I want you to come with me, Tony.
Okay, I'm game.
And we will be on an exploring trip there. And I had a very dear friend we did, Dr. Devendra Varma from India. He had traveled all over the world in search of vampire cases and had written many books, to the extent that he was knighted by the Queen of England for his work in that. Dr. McNally and Dr. Florescu, two professors here in America, had spent 15 years in Romania looking for Castle Dracula. And when they finally found it, which was high up in the Carpathian Mountains, it was in such a remote area that very few people ever go there. Dr. McNally, looking for this castle, had told Lorraine and I that he was so stunned by what they had found and a little shaken up that he didn't really go into the castle ruins because it's high up about maybe 1,000 feet up on top of a mountain.
Yeah, it says the first year that he found it, he never entered that castle. His son, in fact, after all the years of research, his son entered the castle for the first time before he did, because it had such a negative, profound effect on him.
Now, there was a real Count
Dracula, yes, Vlad Tepes, who lived during the 14th century. He was a very cruel, very, very cruel man. It's said that he had impaled something like 10,000 enemy soldiers. And when the Turkish army was coming to invade his part of Transylvania, when they seen this, they said, "This man is mad. We're not attacking his castle." And they turned around and went back again. But there have been many such cases. But I think Whitby Abbey, where you've been, and Lorraine and I have been, which is on the North Sea in England, was made very famous by Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker wrote the first book on Dracula.
Right.
And it was here at Whitby Abbey that he had his Dracula land. And we've been there. We've seen some very, very...
People are scared,
Okay.
and sometimes they don't know what they're scared of.
Hi, I'm here in beautiful snowy Connecticut to visit Lorraine Warren at her home and finally get the opportunity to meet her.
God bless you. It's just so wonderful. I can't believe I'm here. Thank you.
You know, there's so many questions as I've come into this house, and I'm like, I think the one question that I would love to ask you first is, what was one of the most cherished memories that you have of Ed?
For one thing, Ed did not understand my psychic ability.
Did you tell him right away, or how?
I tried to tell him. I even tried to tell my parents, but nobody understood me. I didn't look for it. I really didn't look for it. When I realized there was something about me that was different, and I was at a private Catholic girls' school, and I told one of the nuns that her lights were brighter than Mother Superior. And I paid a price for that. Good looks like very pastel colors around your aura, around them.
And is it always around the head area?
Yes, it's always around the head
Always
area.
around the head area.
And, but then,
Bad
is terrible.
Did you ever say, I wish I didn't have this?
No.
Were
No,
you
and
just grateful to?
No, I didn't do that because that's what God wanted. Somebody told my husband that maybe I could tell them what was in that house. Now, I didn't know that I had that kind of a gift.
Right.
And in fact, I didn't understand my gift at all.
That's got to take something out of you. Every single case, every single time that you have to deal with something like that, it has to take a toll. I don't know how that...
It does. It does take a toll.
When you were at home and you were home and Ed said you were home for 8 days, you didn't come out, you didn't talk to anybody, you didn't eat.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever told anybody what you saw that made you do that?
No, I'm not going to.
And I respect that. In the film The Conjuring, when I watched it for about the third time, because it is such a wonderful film, and I really got the sense that it really was a love story in many ways. But I just felt like he was very protective of you. You were the center of his universe. This family was very much so important.
Yes, that was right.
You've said that this film, The Conjuring, was so very accurate, probably as close that anybody could get to what really happened to you and Ed and the Perrin family. And
yeah, I think it was very well done. Very well done. Very, very well done. When I got up to the top of the stairs, there was a room there, and there was a spirit right in the corner of the room. It's very scary when it happens to you like that.
I can't even imagine.
And we sat on the bed. The bed went up.
Did it physically levitate?
It levitated the bed.
Animals obviously have the ability
to sense.
To sense. Now, with your animals, have they ever had an experience like that?
I remember one time, Ed and I came back from a haunting in northern Connecticut. And we came in the house, and the animals walked backwards. They walked backwards away from us.
Lorraine Warren is my mother-in-law, and she, of course, is a psychic and a clairvoyant and a light trance medium, and she's been involved in the supernatural for, I'd say, 60 years now, maybe more than 60 years, along with her late husband, Ed Warren. And I am Tony Spera, her son-in-law, married to Judy, her daughter. A month after we were dating, one night she says, "Hey, do you want to go see my parents lecture at UConn, University of Connecticut?" I said, yeah, sure. What are they, college, professors?
So you hadn't met them yet?
No. I said, what are they, college lecturers or professors? What are they? She says, no, they're not professors. They're ghost hunters. And I said, what? She said, yeah, the Warrens, Ed Warren, Lorraine Warren, they're my parents. I wasn't like into ghost hunting at the time until I met Ed, and demonology and things like that. Until I met Ed, and he told me about all the different cases he's been on and how bad they were, and how ghosts do exist, that people, when they die, their spirit lives on and never dies. And it was very intriguing to know that when you pass on from this realm, that you're never going to die. And that's one thing we've learned, though, that Ed learned, I learned, and Lorraine knows, that your spirit is never going to die, so that means you're never going to die, just your body. That movie, The Conjuring, was made very well. James Wan took pains to make it like a real incident that happened. It's nothing that Lorraine sought out or Ed sought out.
Exactly.
This movie. They came to Lorraine.
Exactly.
The producers came to Lorraine and said they had a treatment. One of the producers said he had a treatment for one of their cases. And when Lorraine asked what case it was, they said, the Bewitched Farmhouse. And Ed used to always call it that, the Bewitched Farmhouse. And we used to do lectures years and years ago, and all the time when Ed was well, he would say to us, I'd say he said to me maybe more than half a dozen times at the end of a lecture when we're packing up our stuff, he'd say, hey, you know what would make a great movie? And I said, what? He goes, that darn Bewitched Farmhouse in Rhode Island. So a lot of times I'd say, which one is that? He goes, the Perrin house, the one in Rhode Island. He never went with it trying to get it made or anything, but a year and a half after he passed, the phone rang, and it was a producer who wanted to do the farmhouse. Not only does it talk about Ed and Lorraine and bring them to the forefront because they were the pioneers, but it also lets people know that the demonic or the devil in this
Exists.
movie exists. You know, people used to say to Ed Warren, oh, you're only in it to make books. You're only in it to make the limelight, to be on TV or to be in the newspaper. You know what Ed used to say? You're damn right I am. He said, because now I'll do anything I can to expose
The devil.
that the devil exists.
Absolutely.
Because the biggest success that the devil ever had is convincing people that he doesn't exist. Well, the Warren's Occult Museum that's on this property was founded back in 1952, the New England Society for Psychic Research, and there is an occult museum that Ed Warren used to collect these artifacts from various cases that he was on. And some are very, you know, bad. Some are evil, like the Annabelle doll. Also, there's a satanic idol. A satanic idol was found in the woods of Newtown about 1990s, early 90s. But there's a myriad of objects in there that have evil attached to them, that were either used in satanic rituals, witchcraft rituals, diabolical incantations and things like that, or just haunted houses where people that are haunting after they purchase the object and they blame the object.
Shadow doll was bought by a couple who thought it was a Victorian doll. That night they brought into the home, both of them had a very frightening nightmare, and they had the same nightmare. And when they talked about it the next day, they realized something was wrong. They called Ed and Lorraine. Ed came down, and they told him just to take it out.
I'm just not going in. I'm not going to go in there. You know, now that I've lost Ed, I'm not going to go in there.
This is a child's tombstone. Satanic cults steal children's tombstones as altars for satanic rites. But the thing about this is, you see, it says Warren, but here the date of death is August 23rd. That's the day Ed died.
There's only one answer. It's my faith.
Right.
That's what protects me.
Amen to that.
Yeah, that's what protects me, protects my pets.
Because so many people say, and you've heard it a million times, why don't you destroy it? Destroy it if it's so evil.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people do say that to us, but you're destroying, just like I said in the movie The Conjuring, you're only destroying the vessel. When you destroy the vessel, the evil's still there, and it can just wander. We'd like to know where that evil is, so we do binding ritualistic prayers. We do binding prayers. Father Jim does binding prayers around these objects to keep the evil bound within. So we like to know where they are. Where it's in a museum, that's where they stay, instead of letting them loose somewhere into the atmosphere.
Right.
You cannot destroy them.
No. It is letting it, because you don't know what.
My dream, after I pass, that they are all going to the Vatican.
That would be wonderful.
Yes.
This has been a dream come true for me. I've been speaking to Lorraine on the phone on and off for 6 years. She's been kind enough in my quest to have questions answered in regards to the paranormal, but also because you've been quite a mentor for me, whether you know that or not. I don't think I've ever said that to you.
Thank you.
I think you're a mentor to a lot of people, though.
Thank you, my dear.
To Haunted Happenings with the Taunton Paranormal Group. I'm your host Jake, and with me of course is Lou. Tonight we have a special episode for you. We're coming from Monroe, Connecticut, and we have Lorraine Warren and Father Bob Bailey with us. I'd like to thank you both very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for allowing us into your home to speak with you.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you. Would you like to start some questions?
Sure. Now, Miss Warren, when did you realize that you had a psychic ability?
9 years of age. It probably was earlier than that, but what I could see were lights around people. And I felt everybody could see this. And I was the type of child that didn't want to be different. I wanted to fit in. And I was in Laurelton Hall from grammar school. And it was all Catholic private girls' school. And I made the mistake of telling my French teacher, Sister Joseph, who was also my art teacher, that her lights were brighter than Mother Superior's. And that didn't go over very well. It didn't fly. didn't fly. And so with that, not wanting to be different, you know, I tried sharing it with my parents and all. And although they were such, my parents were just the most wonderful parents in the world. And they were heavily involved with the Catholic Church. We were brought up that way. And they tried to understand me. They tried to understand what I meant when I could see these lights around people. So as the result of feeling I was putting pressure on them or making them upset, I suppressed it, but it did not go away. And I began realizing that it wasn't just people that had lights around them, that it was animals that had lights. It was flowers, it was trees, it was everybody. I could see these lights around. And from that, I developed this thing about, I was almost fanatical about the fact that I couldn't bear to see somebody cut a tree down.
Oh.
And of course, my love of animals, probably that is the reason. Because of this, I told you about being able to soon be with the big animals,
Right.
and I'm sure that I'm going to see the auras, and I want to see the auras of these animals also. I've never been that close. You know, I've never been in Africa,
Right.
or where these large animals are. But it started about that time. I did suppress it. I really did suppress it. I didn't talk about it because nobody else talked about it. That meant that I was the only one.
And was it confusing to you, maybe not knowing what was
Yes,
happening?
it was. Until I met Ed. Now, I had no interest in going out with boys. My schooling was important to me, my family, the things I was doing for the church. All of this was important to me, but having a boyfriend wasn't. And the only reason I can think of for that is because of the fact I was in an all-girls school, and I was only 16 years old. But I was home for the summer, and I was going with this one group of girls from CYO, and we were going to a movie. And they asked if I could go. And I asked my parents. They said I could go with the girls to the movies. And we went. And on the way, they told me about this boy they were going to introduce me to. They really did not know me that well at all. I didn't want to say to them, I'm really not interested, because I would seem strange or different if I wasn't interested. And so as a result of this, they said, he's a lifeguard during the day. And I had gone to the beach, but I had never gone to the beach where he was a lifeguard. And then he's an usher in the theater at night.
Oh.
And so I thought, that's nice.
There you go.
That's nice. Now, we go in, and they introduced me to Ed. I want to tell you, I looked at him from the shoes he had on that were polished, to the argyle socks, to the crease in his pants, to the snow white shirt he had on, and all of this. And I thought, what a well-groomed young man you are. After the theater, after the movie, what we did, there was an air raid. It seems foreign.
Oh wow.
But this was 1943, and there was an air raid, and there's a lot of defense factories in Bridgeport. We had moved to Bridgeport from Milford, and so we had to wait for an all clear.
Oh.
When I think about it now, you know, we didn't think much about that at all, but I think, you know, if we were a little more educated, we realized how scary it really was.
Oh, absolutely.
And then later, you know, we found out that these submarines came so close and like that.
Mm.
So he left the theater with us. And he said, I'll buy all you girls a Coke at Rich's. We were on Old Mill Green on Boston Avenue, Bridgeport. And Rich's was like a little ice cream place. So we went in, and I ordered an ice cream soda. I never drank like Cokes and stuff like that. And I still don't like.
I don't either.
Makes two of us. So anyway, he kidded me. He kidded me from then on. All the time that he knew I was a gold digger from the first night he met me. Because I ice cream soda. And he, you know, all the other girls, were ordering nickel Cokes.
Oh.
That was a few years back.
Yes, honey, that's few. So then we walked. He said, I'll walk along with you home. His house was going to come first. And he's walking backwards and talking to us. He knew these girls. And talking to us. And then we got to his house. And the girl said, wow, we're already to your house, Ed. And with that, he started to run across the street. He says, okay, nice to meet you, Lorraine. And he ran across the street and up the stairs into his home. And I didn't see that young, athletic, 142-pound boy. I seen my husband as he looked just before he passed. And I wrote in my diary, I'll spend the rest of my life with you.
So it was destiny that you met that night.
I guess it must have been. It must have been destiny, because the way we fit together, you know, we're both artists. We made our living as artists. Art funded us so that we didn't have to charge people even expenses to go out to their homes. And we never took money for doing it. And so then, as the result of this whole thing, we began to realize that we were meant to be together. But when we were married, let me explain more of it to you. We were married on survivor's leave. The last ship that my husband made 4 trips across the North Atlantic under fire before he turned 18. He entered on his 17th birthday.
Oh my God.
And he tried to get in at 16 and they found out that he forged. So as a result of that, we were married on survivor's leave. We were married in St. Charles in Bridgeport, and we got permission from the diocese to be married at night because he only had like, I think it was a 2-day pass or something. I'll never forget that he got married in a wet uniform. I'll never forget, because he wanted to be married in his whites. And so then he went back to base. And when he went back to base, the Catholic priest, the chaplain, said, "You were just married." He said, "Yeah, who told you, Father?" And I don't know who told him, but anyway, he said, "I'm going to try to get you a couple of more days with your bride." I got pregnant. So, and with that, the war ended in 45 in Europe, and we thought he'd be discharged. He became a hero for saving this man. He was one of 69 survivors on 2 ships in the North Atlantic in February. It went down. Most of them either froze to death or drowned or were burnt to death.
My God.
And so all of these things were, in a way, they were kind of miraculous. There's a lot to tell you about it, and maybe you should know it in order to know me. But while Ed made one trip across the North Atlantic before we married, he never made a trip across the North Atlantic after we were married because the war was ending then. And this one trip, he got off his ship in Scotland, and he was alone, and he looked in a puddle, is how he put it. He stepped over a puddle, and he looked in it and knew something was terribly wrong with me.
Really?
Mm-hmm. My appendix ruptured. The doctors did not want to operate because they told my parents it was useless, that I wasn't going to make it because the poison had gone already through my system. I had an experience where I could see my father outside of my room at this Catholic hospital. I could see a nun, and I could see my mother at the foot of my bed. And I could see a sailor kneeling down next to my bed.
That was your husband?
He was my boyfriend.
Oh, boyfriend at the time.
Yes. And I was above it. I guess I was out of my body. I knew nothing about being out of body, though. But that's what was happening to me. So things like this, yes, they must have been predestined, as you put it. I believe that wholeheartedly. And so with all of this, when we did get married, and thought he was going to be discharged, he was sent to Japan. He was sent to the West Coast for the invasion of Japan. If he was, I would have never had my husband.
Wow.
I would have never, ever had him. His ship was numbered, and I knew all that. I have a letter. I didn't even know this was possible. I have a letter. I have all his letters in my Laurelton Hall briefcase. And he tells about the commander telling them that there was going to be a bomb drop that could end the war. But of course we don't believe that. That is what one of his letters states.
Wow.
I didn't know that it was ever known to anybody. I never knew that. And then, you know, that's all packed away. Right now, I'm still not to a time where I can read things like that, you know, all these letters. I can't do that at all. So he was one of the men that they picked on certain ships to go in to Japan as voice radio. They asked him if he knew anything about voice radio. They asked a lot of sailors on a lot of ships. Now, not many men knew anything about voice radio, but he did. And so he was sent into Nagoya. In 2000, and going into 2001, we were in Japan. We worked with Buddhist monks in the mountains of Japan regarding exorcisms and hauntings. It was fun. Oh, it was fabulous. It was just absolutely fabulous. Ed spoke some Japanese because he had gone in as report director, and so he understood some Japanese. I understood nothing. It's a very hard language, but I certainly understood the people themselves. You don't need to sometimes speak the language, but you are able somehow to communicate without speaking a language. And so what happened was, we were there, and one night at dinner, this was all filmed for national TV in Japan, and these Buddhist monks were willing to go along with this, which was really different, very different, that they would be willing to go along. Oh, yes, Buddhist religion.
Oh, right.
Oh, God, but they're beautiful. Oh, God, those priests are beautiful. When Ed and I arrived, were 2 Roman Catholics from America. When we arrived, this long driveway, these monks were all lining it with tapers. You felt so humbled by that, so humbled by it. And we did investigate quite a few hauntings. We were involved in exorcisms that were there. The last exorcism that we were involved in, I knew something was wrong with Ed. And he said to them, I have to go in the car. There's a funny cold that's coming over me. A funny cold. I thought he was coming down with a cold. So on the way back, flying back, I have to backtrack. At dinner this one night, I said in English something that really embarrassed my husband. I said, are we going anywhere near Nagoya? And they said, yes. I said, it would mean the world to me if I could stand on the dock where my husband stood when he got the letter that our daughter was born, and go to the other part of this dock where the ship came that would bring him home. This is what I said.
Okay.
Japan now is nothing like the Japan Ed knew. Japan right now is like a massive, massive Disneyland with car makers all over the place. Gorgeous buildings. I'm driving a Honda. But I don't know how my husband would feel about that, because we always had American cars. But I like that little Honda. And this is the second one I bought. So, or leased. I'm leasing. So, anyway, it is
Better on gas anyway.
They're wonderful. They're wonderful. I'm sorry, honey. So, we're having dinner for the second time this one night, and the camera crew's going back to Tokyo. And I thought, why aren't we going back to Tokyo? You know, everything about us was being filmed. And that night, we were staying in this hotel. And, they're mansions. You should see these hotels. We were on the 42nd floor.
Oh, wow.
And Ed looked out the window. He was standing there. And I heard him say something. And I went over and I said, honey, what did you just say? And I just said, honey, what did you say? I said, Nagoya, another time, another place. And he put his arm around me and said, you don't think it looked like this when I was here. He said, see, there was no naval base. Ed lived with MacArthur's army as a naval man. But he said, you don't think it looked anything like this. He said, the only way I could find my way back if I ever went off base would be through the smokestacks.
Wow.
So then that day we were involved in hauntings around there, like where the samurai warrior had his home and it was tore down. Ed was given the samurai warrior's hat and everything. It's downstairs, yes.
Wow.
Beautiful. So we were doing that. We were having dinner there again that night. And then on the way back, we were supposed to be going back to Tokyo. And we were going to drive back. We weren't taking the fast train. You know, they have the fast train.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you should see how fast you get around there. Wow.
Yeah.
You really get around fast. I'd probably go to New York in 10 minutes.
Wow.
My goodness.
And you go by Fuji and everything. So anyway, we're going. And I said, we're not going back the same way we came. And I said, Susie, this one guy, Susie, he was the chauffeur. Susie, are we going where I think we're going? He said, yes. They got permission to go through the archives, their media people, to go through the archives to find right where Ed was.
Really?
Everything there is brand new. It's brand new. It's painful too. And that area is all boarded off with great big fences. It's a Mitsubishi warehouse. That's where he lived with MacArthur's army.
Wow.
His office was like on a second floor. They lit it. Nothing had changed. The wainscoting, nothing. They had it all lit. He got emotional. He got
I'm sure.
very emotional.
God.
He walked down the dock.
Mm-hmm.
Then he came back and he put his arm around me and he said, this is where I was standing when I got the word that Judy was born.
Wow.
And then he walked up and he said, and this is where the Hat Creek came in, the ship that took me home. On the way back on the plane, he said, honey, we just made full circle in our lives. He collapsed soon after we came home and never regained.
I'm so sorry.
But why did God let all of that come to us? Why did he really allow all of that for us to go back there
Right in
again?
a full circle.
We made,
The closure.
we just made full circle in our lives.
Wow.
He was a guy, he would never, a clergy would say to him, mainly clergy, not lay people, clergy would say to him, you're psychic? No, I'm not psychic. He did, he was, of course, but never used it and never said anything about my wife. My wife is psychic, but I'm not.
Wow.
Yes. But even he had knowledge and insight that was really incredible. Really incredible. You'd have to know him
Right.
to know that. But I guess, who, as you say, it was destiny.
Mhm.
From the 23rd of June, 1943, until I lost my husband in 2006. I took care of him for 4.5 years. He was full care patient. That was his room over there behind, right there. That's our bedroom, but the room where the hospital bed was right over there. And there's Ed right up there. That's how Ed lived just before he passed, right up there on top. And that's how Ed looked when we were married.
Huh.
That was that navel picture. And I'll show you our wedding picture.
Wow.
That's our life.
It's fascinating story. Really.
That's really who we are.
Again, it's been an honor to talk with you.
We're two people that I guess God had plans for.
Absolutely. Can I ask you, not to get off that, but you obviously came in to know Father Bob.
Yes,
And
that's
how,
been a
how did
pleasure.
that come about?
Oh, that was wonderful. I actually met Father Bob through Paranormal State,
Okay.
and we became friends right off the bat. See, my maiden name is Moran,
Mm-hmm.
and Bailey. You know, two Irishmen, you know, when they get together, they don't separate real fast. So, in fact, don't forget, I'm going to Ireland in November. My family is from Ireland, and so we're going there. So when I was talking to our parish priest, he said, "What part?" I says, "Northern." "Northern? A good Catholic like you is going to Northern Ireland?" I said, "Father, be a little more open-minded. My relatives came from Southern Ireland, but I'm going to Northern Ireland to the university to speak."
So you feel like that was some sort of destined meeting as well? I know
Oh, yes.
you said, Father, that
Oh, yeah.
there are no coincidences,
No,
that
there's no
things
coincidence.
always happen for a reason.
And then at one point in our career, oh God, I don't know how far back, 1974. So we were probably at that time, regarding going public, that happened in the very late 60s. And then we started, well, the day that started was the day that changed our lives forever.
We're running a little bit out of time, so I want to thank you very much. We've been here in Monroe, Connecticut with Lorraine Warren, Father Bob Bailey, and for those of you who don't know Ed Warren, Lorraine's husband, we do have a photo of him here that we'd like to show everyone. This has been a talk about her life with Ed, their experiences. It's been such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for this.
You're
This has
welcome.
been an honor on behalf of myself and our group.
Thank
Father
you.
Bob, thank you. For those
Mary
of you
Poppins.
out there,
Mary Poppins.
as he calls it, the paranormal Mary Poppins. With that, I'm Jake.
And I'm Lou.
Good night.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your host, Tony Spera, with hosts Ed and Lorraine Warren, and a special guest tonight, Mrs. Gail Martin, correct?
Yes.
Mrs. Gail Martin, from Brookfield, who had a unique experience happen to her about 13 years ago. And what I'd like to do on this show is to start out first prefacing with Ed and Lorraine. The show is basically going to be about spirit photography and ghosts, things of that nature. I'd like to start out with Ed and Lorraine explaining what happened in this photograph that Gail was involved in.
Well, Gail came to us as a student, but prior to coming to us, Tony, she had attended a lecture the three of us had given in Monroe.
Monroe.
Am I right? In Monroe. And she gave Ed a little photograph, a little small 3x5 photograph, and it showed a woman, the spirit of a woman, standing next to her in her yard. I was intrigued by that photograph, and I took it and I had a slide made of it, and I brought it home and looked at it, and you could make out now on the slide all of the detail of this elderly woman. You could make out the fact that she was wearing like some sort of a dressing gown and a house coat over it. And she is looking at Gail.
We have a slide of that. They can put it on.
Yeah, we have, and she is looking at her, and she is digging in her garden. Now Gail becomes a student, I never connected at all. I didn't connect the same person who gave the photograph.
She's the person in the photograph.
That she was the person in the photograph.
I see.
Because, Tony, you're looking at the ghost more than you're looking at the other person. And then she mentioned one night in class that she had another photograph taken moments later. Now, the history of all of this is really phenomenal. But I think Gail should tell that story.
I think it'd be good
about
if she could explain her experiences
the
before
house
we
she
see that
bought
slide.
and everything.
I think that'd be nice. Gail?
Well, we bought a cottage, and we did a lot of construction on it, made it into a house. And this picture was taken during that construction.
Okay.
From what we can gather about it, we believe that the woman is a woman that owned the property before we did.
Okay.
And we tried to get a little bit of background on her because we really can't recognize who she is. We just know it's nobody that we know. So we reached the niece of the woman that owned that property, who we believe this is, and we're trying to get a little bit more information about her to verify who it actually is.
What did you think of the picture when you first seen it?
Well, we were so busy working and we didn't really give it a lot of thought. Initially, we kind of laughed about it because it looked like a statue standing next to me, and we just figured it was a double exposure and really didn't pay a lot of attention
and
to it.
imagine how many people viewing this think psychic photographs are double exposures too.
Well, I had seen your lecture in Monroe, and then I said, gee, with the pictures that you had shown, I said, I have a picture like that at home too. So that next day I went and dug it out, and I had the two of them there. I had forgotten that they were both there.
That's the incredible thing about this, Gail, is that, number one, this spirit woman is looking at you. She looks kind of amused over the fact that you're digging in that property. And then the second shot, you're laughing because your husband said something funny to you. And this woman has actually got her hand up to her mouth and she's laughing, which shows that the spirit is very aware of what you're saying and what you're doing. And that's incredible. You know, we have two pictures like that, large ones, but we do have a slide which they'll see the first picture. I know it's going to come up there sometime.
Okay, well, I think before we see the slide, I don't know if we could even focus in on this. I think they're going to put the slide up, so I won't be able to show this.
No.
So I think we'll see the slide first, and then we'll look at this. Maybe this would be a better shot. I'm not sure which would be better.
Better. I don't know
But,
which was going to be the
about
better.
13 years ago, it was taken.
There
was
it
taken.
is.
Okay,
There
here
it
it
is,
is.
Tony. Now, you see that Gail is higher than that woman, but Gail is on a pile of dirt. She's up, and she's digging, and the woman is looking down at her, what she is doing. Now, this woman had all sorts of gardens and things in this area, but there were so many sentimental attachments to this particular property. The house that Gail is living in, we believe.
What age did you realize that you had a special gift?
9. I was 9 years old, and I was in a private Catholic girls' school, and I began to see lights around the nuns. And I looked sometimes, and as I looked, I realized I could see lights around some of the girls. But I made the mistake of telling my French teacher that her lights were brighter than Mother Superior's. And that didn't go over too well in a private Catholic school. So from that time on, I kind of suppressed it, but it didn't go away. It never left. It never left me. It never went away. And it did increase very naturally. I've been tested at UCLA for my ability. I didn't go there to be tested. I went there to learn more about Kirlian photography, the ability to photograph the human aura in everything that God creates. I find it absolutely fascinating. Fascinating. And I worked with them, and they wanted to work with me as a natural psychic. I have never read books on it. I have never had training. Everything about it is all natural.
How did you meet your husband, Ed, and how did you two discover that you had the same interests?
Well, that was the continuation of your last question, because I only went out with one boy in my life, and that's the guy I married. I'd never been out on another date before or since. And so he was an usher in the theater, and a group of girls from church were going, it was in the summer, were going to the movies, and they invited me to go. And halfway there, they told me that they wanted to introduce me to this boy, and that wasn't really of interest to me. You know, my schooling, my religion, my family, they were all interests, but, you know, that wasn't of interest. I was 16 years old, and so when we went in, I didn't realize he was the usher in the theater. So I looked at him from his feet right up to his head, and I thought, what a clean-cut looking boy you are. And then after the theater, after the movie was over, he said he was going to treat us girls to a nickel Coke. And I ordered an ice cream soda. And he, from that time on, way into our marriage, he would always say that he knew I was a gold digger from the first day because I ordered an ice cream soda when everybody else ordered a nickel Coke. And so he walked home with us, but his house was first. And he walked ahead of us like he faced us, but was walking backwards, talking to the four of us. And then one of the girls said, "Oh, Ed, we're almost to your house." And he ran across the street. I didn't see that young, athletic, 16-year-old boy. I seen my husband as he looked just before I lost him. And I wrote in my diary on the 23rd of June, 1943, "I'll spend the rest of my life with you." Yes. So it was definitely a continuation of the first question.
Would you say it was love at first sight?
Yeah, well, I would definitely say it was love at first sight. Yes, and there has been no other since.
What has been the most haunted location you've ever visited?
I think the United Kingdom has, you know, it's a very old area. We were involved in some extremely haunted places over there. But then all along our East Coast, Connecticut, and all along the East Coast there into the New England states is also very, very haunted because of all our old homes and tragedies that had occurred there through the years.
Can spirits follow you home from a location?
Mm-hmm. And they do, yes. So that's why you have to take a certain type of protection so that they don't do that.
Can spirits communicate with us through our dreams?
Yes, it's the easiest way for spirit communication to take place is on the dream level.
And one final question. When people lie to you, what kind of aura do you see?
So I have to really tell it's red there. It gets red at certain levels. But you know how people tell a lie and then compound the lie? Yes. Well, it gets redder and redder. Sometimes I insult them. Sometimes I don't.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for visiting us at California University.
You're welcome, dear. Thank you for having me.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another program of Seekers of the Supernatural with demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed and Lorraine Warren have been involved in the supernatural realm for over 40 years. Tonight we have an exciting program. We're going to be seeing many psychic photographs, which the Warrens will be speaking about, and my name is Tony Sparrow. Ed, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, if I could, about psychic photographs in general. How are they taken? When are they taken? Can anybody take them? Do you have to be a psychic, for instance, to take a psychic picture?
Psychic pictures, I think, are one of the most interesting phenomena to me that we come across in our investigations because the camera is an impartial witness. It takes a picture of what it sees. It's not something that's made up, something that it believes in. It's an impartial witness. And there are many ways that pictures of ghosts can be taken. Now, when I speak of a ghost, Tony, I'm talking about something like the electromagnetic energy, which really you can't see any characteristics of anything. It's just energy. An apparition would be one in which you actually see the characteristics of that person, such as Katie King, which we'll be seeing in this series here. But a ghost can actually project its image onto the film simply by thinking of what it looks like. For instance, if I wanted to look like Andrew Jackson and I were a spirit, I would think of what Andrew Jackson looks like, and I would project that image telepathically, and the camera would pick that up. Also, if I wanted to project any kind of an image to a person, say for yourself, you walk into a house, I'm a ghost. I project the image as I look right now to you. I bypass your physical eye and go into your mind's eye or the third eye. You see it like Lorraine sees it. We go into a haunted house. She's seeing things visually. I can't see that. You can't see that. So she's very necessary to our investigation. Even though I can't see a thing, I know it's there because I can trust her clairvoyance. The camera can pick up many different things that we cannot. For instance, in a spiritualist church in Bristol, Connecticut, I was amazed one night to see all kinds of spirit forms appearing on the television that they were taking. But we couldn't see that with the physical eye. But the camera picks that up. And that's the importance of your cameras today, which we didn't have many years ago. Today we can take a camcorder, we can go into a graveyard, we can go into a house, a location, and take film of the ghost and prove it was there. This is how I took the amazing film of the White Lady of Union Graveyard. I stayed there night after night in this graveyard. I would go in at midnight. I would stay until 5 o'clock in the morning when the sun came up. I'd have my van parked out there in the middle of that graveyard. I'd see what we refer to as ghost lights forming all over, but nothing ever happened until the sixth night, which was on September 1st, 1990. And I'll always remember the time, 2:40, because it was one of the greatest moments of my life. As I was sitting in that van in the middle of that graveyard, I could see all of these ghost lights flittering all about. Then suddenly I heard the whimpering of a woman. That's the only way I can describe it. Although there were millions of insects, just crickets, everything tripping away. I heard this weeping. I had the camcorder right alongside of me in the van. I grabbed the whole of it, went outside, and I could see all of these ghost lights forming into a figure of a female. And then I could actually make out that it was a female because I could see the long dark hair. I could make it out much clearer than what my video camera picked up later. I could see a woman which appeared to be in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. And she looked as though she was much closer than what my video camera picked up. That's the amazing thing. I put the camera up to my eye and I couldn't see her. I took it away and I could see her with the physical eye. I quickly placed the camera on the tripod, which was right set up next to the van. I let it run. I started to walk toward this ghostly figure, but she disappeared. I should have known better than to do that, because I know that this will happen with ghosts. I backed up and she came right back into focus again. Now she's coming towards me, coming right through the tombstones, right directly toward me. But then all of a sudden these black, what we call shadow ghosts, appeared. They looked sort of like maybe a black poodle jumping up against her. And they were forcing her towards Route 59, where she has been seen many times over the past 50 years by many different witnesses. Then there was a large monk-like figure which appeared, and then she was gone. I quickly wrapped up my equipment, put it in the van, brought it home, woke Lorraine up. We put it on the TV, and there it was. I had captured the White Lady on film. The first time that had ever happened to me in 40-some years.
That's amazing. And to think that you did this, how far from your house were you?
Maybe
15 minutes.
Maybe 3-4 miles, Tony.
You traveled the world over, and you got a fantastic shot.
Traveled all over Europe, traveled to Australia, Japan, you name it, Germany, England, Canada, Mexico. Sure, we got photographs, but we never got film. And that's what, on special dinners and things, we show this very rare film.
Now, Lorraine, can anybody, for instance, just walk into that graveyard and take a picture, and it will come out okay as a spirit?
Yeah, that's what's so amazing, Tony.
How would they go about doing that? Just walk in there with a special camera or?
No, they don't need a special camera. Tony, they don't even need special film. Just your regular speed, your 200 speed film. But a flash is important.
Is important.
Now look at the picture that we're looking at right now, Tony. You can explain about this, how John took that
Okay,
picture.
I understand that we have some psychic photos that our cameraman, John Helstosky, has taken. John has been involved in our work for
Oh,
a
yeah.
long time, and a student. But John has taken some phenomenal pictures, and what we'd like to do, if we could, is to put some of these slides up on the monitor so we could describe exactly what we're seeing here, Ed. So if we could put the first slide up and look at it. Wow.
Well, there you're seeing your stereotype ghost. Look at the appendage-like arms and legs. You know, when you see these little cute ghosts that are painted and drawn on Halloween, this is your stereotype ghost right here.
Isn't that beautiful?
The electromagnetic energy taken from the plant life in the cemetery is used by the spirit to form this image. Then, if you're there long enough and the spirit is knowledgeable enough, it can actually form into something like the White Lady, like what I see.
But Tony, realize you're not seeing that, you know, when you're taking it. You don't see anything.
You're just seeing a crystal clear night.
You're just seeing a crystal clear night. Be sure it's not foggy or rainy or like that. Make sure you have a crystal clear night. And you go there. Now, after 9 o'clock at night is the best time. But don't go inside the graveyard because...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tony Sparrow. Welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural with your hosts, Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into a very fascinating case to start. The case of Florence Viner, who lived in a haunted house and had some terrible incidences happen. Questions have been asked of us, of Ed and Lorraine. What do you do when you see a ghost? What do you do if you see a ghost? Those questions and many others will be answered for you tonight. I'd like to start with Mr. Warren, if I could. Ed, I know you're going to talk about the Viner case, but can you tell us what would someone do if they encountered a ghost?
Well, Tony, it would all depend on the circumstances, the situation, the whole thing. If you're in a car like Rod Vesey was, driving along at 1:30 in the morning and a ghost suddenly appears alongside of you in the car, what can you do? You know, and it comes so fast, and then the apparition disappears quickly. So by the time that you're trying to figure out what you should do, it's already gone, you know. And some people, of course, would just be very startled. But if you're, say, a Christian, you're lying in bed, and something wakes you up, and you look out into the darkness, and you see a ghostly figure there, a woman, a man, whatever it might be, you simply make the sign of the cross in the direction that you're looking at it, and you would say, in the name of God, is there something that I can help you with? You shouldn't really hold a lot of communication with spirits, but in some cases you're dealing with earthbound spirits, people who are very confused when they died. They don't understand why they're not in that physical body anymore, and they're drawn to the aura of a very sensitive person. And during the sleeping state, as you wake up, you are in a good situation where a spirit can reach you, because you're on that same astral level. So I would suggest that you simply say, in the name of God, is there something that I can do to help you? If it's an evil spirit, it will disappear immediately. If it's a positive one, say it's a relative or some spirit that's just been drawn to you, then you might get some communication. I know there's been people that have seen spirits of children, of adults, and they get very frightened, and they'll jump up and run out of the room. Well, that's natural reaction for most people. But actually, what you should do is to find out what it is, what they want. It's kind of like this woman over in Torrington. It was her own husband that would show up. And she woke up one night soon after he died, about 6 months later, which I think was beautiful, but it scared her. And he would be sitting right in the chair, just like you're sitting there. And he would say, "Are you all right, dear?" And she got so frightened, she jumped out of bed and ran out of the house and wouldn't come back for a few days. And then the same thing happened when she went back in again. She jumped out of bed and ran right, out of the house again. So the third time, her daughter said, "Mom, why don't you just ask Dad what he wants or tell him that you are perfectly all right?" Which she did, and she seen him get up. He was sitting in a chair. He got up, he walked down the hallway, and she never seen him again. But he was disturbed by the fact that something was bothering the wife, which of course it would be. He was trying to put her mind at ease. Say, for instance, you encounter a spirit in a haunted house.
Right.
And it's one that's a very negative spirit. In that case, you're not going to hang around and ask what it wants, because you're going to be frightened out of your wits. So in them kind of cases, I simply say, get out of the house yourself, leave, you know. There are spirits that can do great physical harm to people. In tonight's presentation, we're going to be talking about a house in Woodstock, Connecticut, which is almost on the Massachusetts border. Very interesting case. Mrs. Florence Viner, who was, I think she was Miss Connecticut or Miss...
She was Miss Connecticut
at one time. Very pretty looking lady. And she got married to an older man. They bought this old inn, an old revolutionary inn it was, not realizing it, that it was very haunted. And soon after they moved in, they had the farm hands, some of them who would live upstairs in this home. And the farm hands would go to bed with knives under their pillows. One even had a gun, and they said, "Well, why do you have knives? Why do you have guns?" And they said, "Well, we're frightened to stay up there, Mrs. Viner." She said, "Frightened of what?" They told her that, you know, the doors would open and close, the beds would shake, they were scared, they would hear somebody running up the stairs. They would hear what sounded like a fight between two men going on. They would hear the clash of swords, and this would really frighten them. So one night she was home alone, and her husband didn't come home yet. She was waiting for him to come home. And all of a sudden she heard something open the door, pounding on the door, open the door, footsteps ran up these stairs. Then she heard what sounded like a fight between two men, and then two thumps. Well, she said that, you know, she was so frightened, she went in and she got her .22 revolver.
Jeez.
She went upstairs, but she couldn't find anything. Came down again, and then she told about other incidents occurring where she would be lying in bed, and suddenly she would hear this loud roaring sound. She said it sounded almost like a foundry. And her husband wouldn't hear a thing. He would be almost like in a state of thantomania, paralyzation. She couldn't even wake him up. Then she would see this here glow, and it would form into a ball, electromagnetic ghost ball, and then it would go into a cigar shape, and she'd see this dark form moving all around the room, a shadow ghost.
But I think it's important, Tony, to realize, or for our viewers to realize, like Ed just gave reference to her husband and how he was affected. That is very, very common. The majority of the cases that are brought to our attention, they will tell us the woman of the house. Remember that women are more sensitive, so women
Lorraine, I have to
perceive
correct you.
things.
They're not patients, they're clients. If they were patients, they'd be in a mental institution.
What patients?
You said patients, didn't you?
No.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Secrets of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera, along with Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren. Tonight we're going to speak of a fascinating case that happened right here in Connecticut, the Brookfield Demon Murder Case, which was also made into a book that we have here, and also made into a movie of the week called The Demon Murder Case. And what I'd like to do is start off, if I could, with you, Lorraine. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in this case right from the start?
We were contacted by Father Dennis, who at that time was pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Brookfield, Tony. And the call came in, and he spoke about a young boy who he had been trying to help, but recognized it as a case of possession. He told me that he was very leery of becoming involved in this case because he had been assigned by the bishop to exorcise another home, but this was not of an individual now, of a home that had infestation going on that we investigated. But he said, I want you to know that you have my prayers. At that time, he was going to Ireland with his mom, and he was concerned I think that the devil would get back at him maybe through his mother. Now, he spoke of David and David's problems. He said that David had a slight learning disability, but there was very bizarre behavior occurring to this young 11-year-old boy. When he mentioned about the boy's problem with a learning disability, we had contacted a doctor in Trumbull, Dr. Giangrasso, and asked him if he would be willing to go to the home with us that night. It was a real hot night, Tony. And the reason we asked Dr. Giangrasso was because he too had a son with a similar problem. And we felt that if there were a type of medication maybe that David would be on that might have been causing it, that he would recognize that, but that was not the case. David's case was not severe enough to have any type of medication. David was in the very beginning stages of demonic possession. We went to the house this hot night. I can remember like the steam and the moisture coming off the ground. It was a weird night when we arrived there. First, Ed tripped going up the steps into the house. And Dr. Giangrasso made kind of a laughing comment. And he tripped and fell too. And when we got in the house, we were sitting there at the table talking. Now you would watch David, and he would be doodling, you know, drawing or something like that, and he'd be concentrating on what he was doing. And then he would look up, and it was no longer a little 11-year-old boy.
Now this 11-year-old boy would become extremely strong. I've seen nights when it would take 4 and 5 men to hold him down. He would be ranting and raving and yelling. There was times when he would attack his mother. Now this boy loved his mother. He loved his father. And at one time he actually broke the mother's nose, I believe. Arnie Johnson, who was a young man that was engaged to his sister, Debbie, would help every night to control the boy. He'd come home from work, he was a landscaper, worked very hard, and he'd have his supper, lay down, but then just around 11 o'clock was when this would occur to David. As Lorraine said, all of a sudden you'd look at him, he was normal, the next second it wasn't David anymore. And this would go on until the sun came up. The boy would roll around, he would go into fits. I seen one time when he actually levitated, had extreme strength, terrible obscenities would come from him. And Arnie Johnson, who was a young man, who I would call probably an all-American boy. He loved sports, he was into baseball, he had many awards for baseball. He loved fishing, and he and Debbie, his fiancée, who was David's sister, would go off fishing and they'd have a good time. But this kid, 18 years old at the time, would stay awake all night long and then go to work the next morning. But he made a fatal mistake. One night he said, and he screamed at these devils, "Take me on. Leave my little buddy alone." He got his wish.
He challenged the demonic.
He challenged the demonic. Now, by this time, Tony, into the case, the Catholic priests were already involved. Father Dennis had left for Ireland. Another young priest was assigned to the parish at that time, and another young man who had just recently been ordained was also assigned there. They came to visit us, and the two of them, finally, it grew to having 6 priests involved in it. 6 priests.
3 of them.
3 of them.
From the Vatican.
3 of them ordained and schooled in Rome, these men. And they were very frightened of the things that Arnie would say. He was such a compassionate young man, such a low-key person. Never once did I see him show any type of violent behavior. He was a perfect gentleman, Mr. and Mrs. Warren, this, everything. Just a beautiful person. Tremendous respect for the priest.
If you were going to have a son, he'd be the boy you'd want.
Yeah, that's the kind of a boy he was, Tony.
But he made that fatal mistake.
And,
challenging the devils.
and I know that one of the Catholic priests even met with him to talk with him because he was so concerned about his welfare. And because, like you say, he challenged it, Tony. And remember that when you challenge the demonic, it doesn't act at that particular given time, Tony. It waits until you are the most vulnerable, and then it strikes.
When you least suspect it.
When you least suspect it.
Now what happened was actually, Arnie had gone to a pizza parlor with Debbie, his fiancée, and his sisters. They met Alan Bono there, a friend of theirs. They went back to the Bono's house, and Arnie disappeared for a few minutes. When he came back, he was somebody entirely different.
What? Now when
he doesn't recognize or know anything about what happened from that point on.
Well, now, Tony, we're going to backtrack from time to time.
What I'd like to do, if I could interrupt for one moment. I know, Ed, that you and Lorraine both have brought slides tonight. Do you think perhaps we should look at perhaps the first few slides just to get an idea of what this was all about?
Yes, that's a good idea.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera. Tonight we have two special guests with us, along with your hosts, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Tonight we have Dr. Joe Klemick and Jennifer Benever, who are psychic investigators, who will be talking about two haunted cases that are active right now as we speak. What I'd like to do is start out with Ed, if I may, and ask Ed about the house that is in Trumbull, Connecticut.
Trumbull, Connecticut, yeah. This is a very interesting case in that there's three young ladies that lived there and the mother. And it seems that a murder was committed many years ago. Probably 35, 40 years ago. And what they see is the apparition or ghost of a young girl. And the mother has been seen that she's one time been in the bedroom and she turned around, she felt there was a presence there. And here's this girl, she's looking at her, she's around 15 years old, and she's smiling and she's very happy. And then she just disappeared. Well, the mother never said anything about this. And the next sighting was in the garden. She was working out in her garden and she felt a presence again. She turned around and here's this young girl again looking at her and looking very happy. And then she just disappeared. Now this is broad daylight. This is very, very unusual. This is an outdoor spirit, and we call those lepties, outdoors. So the next sighting was one of the daughters, a young girl, I guess she was around 18. She was in her bedroom, she was puttering around doing homework or something, and all of a sudden she felt a presence. And she looked around and here's that same girl. And she's looking at her, looking very happy, smiling, and then she actually walked over and sat on the bed. I believe there was a conversation between them.
There was a conversation between the two of them, and then this dark form, who we believe to be the person who had perpetrated it, of this man, and the girl ran and hid in what was at that time a closet, but is no longer a closet today, Tony. Now, when we went to the house, we tried something different. Ed said, I'd like to try something different in this house. Instead of commanding the spirits, you know, in God's name to reveal themselves, let's try to do it in a much more gentle manner. Now, I don't know why he chose this particular house.
I was thinking to myself, if I was a spirit and somebody walked in and I didn't know who this person was, and they start screaming, in the name of Jesus Christ, get out of this house, leave now, don't ever come back, I wouldn't feel very welcome, even if I was an earthbound spirit. I'd stay hidden. So I thought what we should do is to treat the spirit as though we're welcoming in to have a conversation with us, and that's what you did.
And that is exactly. Ed played this music, which was very gentle, very low
What kind of music?
type of music, like fairy
Classical music.
like a classical
And
music or
spirits
fairy
like
music.
this type of thing. You know, the emotions are everything. So if you make the spirit welcome, they're going to come in. It's just like if somebody walked in here right now, if it was somebody you didn't like, you wouldn't stay here too long. But if it's somebody you like, you'll stay around, have conversation. Spirits don't change. People don't change. Their emotions don't change. So we wanted to make a friendly atmosphere for this young girl or the man to come into, and then we could communicate with them.
Now, what had happened then at this time, Tony, was that Joe was taking film. He was taking video footage. Now, we had noticed, both Jennifer and I and one of the other people, one of the other researchers who were with us, noticed that one particular area of this house was not a comfortable area.
I just wanted to add this, that we decided to go back there, and Joe and Jennifer and a couple of other people came as investigators from the New England Society for Psychic Research. And we had cameras all set up, we had recorders all set up, and the idea was to try and get some film showing ghostly phenomena, such as electromagnetic energy or ghost globules, or maybe even a face or a full figure. So this is why Joe and Jennifer were there.
Yes.
Joe,
yeah, let him give.
What did you experience in that house?
I didn't experience much. I'm the cameraman and the audio man in many instances, but in that house, I think one of the most striking things to me was when you were playing that music, and Lorraine and Jennifer were sitting at the table. The two of them, at the same time, seemed to be in the same place, but in sync with each other. But you were coming to the house from one direction, and you were coming to the house from the other direction, and talking about what you were seeing and what you were experiencing. And I guess
it was really phenomenal. That does not happen to me that often.
In other words, you and Jennifer were on the same wavelength?
What
were you seeing, Jennifer?
I was approaching, Lorraine had begun by talking about the house back many years ago when this incident occurred, and all of a sudden I found myself traveling along with this young girl who was coming through the fields toward the house.
This is clairvoyantly now.
This is clairvoyantly, and Lorraine was while I'm thinking this and experiencing this, Lorraine is talking about the back of.
Welcome to BBC One. No, ladies and gentlemen, you're not listening to London's BBC One. You're watching your local cable access program. My name's Tony Spera, with Ed and Lorraine Warren tonight on Seekers of the Supernatural. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you may be wondering why I'm wearing this British police helmet. Well, I'm wearing it because we're going to be speaking about a very intriguing case that happened in London, that began in London, a little suburb called Southend-on-Sea, where a werewolf of London was found. Ed and Lorraine Warren will investigate this, and we'll talk to you about it. We had a film of an actual interview with a werewolf from Ed and Lorraine Warren's house. So maybe I should take this hat off, even though I like it. I think I'll maybe keep it. And we'll talk to Ed and Lorraine Warren about this intriguing case. So I'd like to start out with Ed, if I could first. Ed, can you tell us about this actual case of lycanthropy?
Well, this is the first case of a werewolf, or lycanthropy, which is a scientific name for it, that we ever came across in 45 years of investigations. Lorraine and I were at a friend's home, and we were speaking and talking, fooling around. All of a sudden, my attention was drawn to the fact that there was another Werewolf in London picture on. I thought, my God, they made another one? But this was different. It was on sightings, and I looked at it, and I was watching these police officers, real London police officers, talking about being attacked by a real werewolf. And I looked at Lorraine and I said, what do you think about this? And so as we watched, we realized that this man was the first case of lycanthropy that we ever had come across. So we took it so seriously that we flew to California. We talked with the producers of the show. They told us, yes, that Bill Ramsey was considered a real-life werewolf. And so then we flew to England, and we talked with Bill Ramsey, And I talked and interviewed the police officers who were actually attacked by this man. Now, he stands about 5'7", he weighs maybe 150 pounds, but he would take some of these bobbies, who were well over 6 foot, over 200 pounds, he'd throw them around like they were kindling wood. And the stories that they told us about this man were incredible. How he would ask to be locked up in a jail cell for his protection and the protection of the public. Now, the people out there listening to us right now are probably saying, come on, what are you talking about, a werewolf? Well, I think by the end of this program, they'll realize that Bill Ramsey was a real-life werewolf. But it was Lorraine, really, that talked me into going into London.
As I understand that Lorraine was instrumental in
Yes.
getting both of you involved in this case. Lorraine, can you tell us what happened?
For someone, Tony, that was never interested in things like ghouls and werewolves and vampirism, those things never really interested me. Things like ghosts and haunted homes, yes, I was more open to the fact where human spirits were concerned and the fact that homes could be haunted in such a manner. But there was something in the interview that day as we watched that television show in a friend's home after dinner that I looked at that man and knew that that was very sincere, that something was very real. And something inside of me, Tony, told me that I could help him. Now, how I could help him, I really didn't know. But I carried it, according to family and friends, Tony, I carried it to extreme. We went to California, and to get the information regarding the exact production company that produced that particular series on that werewolf was very, very, very difficult.
Well, I understand you went through a lot of different exercises to get to that point, to know even where that film was produced.
Exactly, and then I purchased it for a good sum of money. And that really angered Ed, that I paid that much money for a video of that interview.
I understand also that Ed really wasn't too keen on the idea.
No, I told Lorraine, I said, you know, even if we find out that this man really is a werewolf, I'm not going to go before the public and start talking about a werewolf. Ghosts and haunted houses and demons and devils are bad enough. But now a werewolf, and in London, you know, who would believe it?
Really?
But it actually occurred.
See, when we got back home, when we got back to Connecticut from California, Tony, I must have played that tape so many times, and I tried to listen to every little thing, but the most important thing were the patches that the men wore, because
that was the tip-off.
That was the tip-off that helped me to be able to know. There are 52 precincts in southern London, and in the middle of the night, while we were in London, we flew over to London for that reason. In the middle of the night, which was the quietest time on the highways and roads over there, I went to precinct after precinct.
I have to interrupt you at this point. It was a full moon that night. We were with Dr. Tony Giangrasso, who's the medical examiner for Fairfield County, and his wife, Betty. And I'll never forget it. A full moon, we're in London, and she's going into these police stations, little places, asking about a werewolf. We were laughing our heads off. And she walked into this first one, and next door was a pub. Guess what the name of it was? The Wolf Pub.
Wow.
And I said, they're going to take her away for sure.
No, I didn't really ask them about a werewolf. I said, I understand.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera, along with hosts, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Also, we have a special guest tonight, Mr. Tony Illigino. And we also have two pets on the show that we'd like to introduce. First, we'd like to introduce Gizmo, and we'd like to introduce Benny.
And
we have his mother, Judy Penny.
His mother, Judy.
That's his mother.
That's his mother.
And why do we have pets on the show, you may be asking? What is going on? Are we trying to be Ozzie and Harriet? I don't think so. What we're trying to do, and we're going to discuss tonight, is the reality that pets, especially pets that are loved by human beings, that they do actually survive death of the physical body. We will show that tonight. We will prove that tonight through our conversations with Ed and Lorraine and with Mr. Pellegino. I'd like to start out with Ed. And Ed, can you explain about tonight's program, about the pets?
Okay, any animal lover will be very interested in our program tonight because, beyond a shadow of a doubt, animals do survive the grave. That is, they also have souls, believe it or not. We know that people write to us maybe once or twice a month telling us that they had a dog or a cat, it died, and yet the animal seems to be in the house. They hear it, the way it ran around, they hear it jump on the bed, they feel it. We've had cases like that of our own. Our own German Shepherd, who we had for 14 years, and that's a painting over there of him, died, and one night I went out to throw the garbage out in the backyard, and there was a military-type doghouse. And Major would sit on that doghouse, very erect, just like I have him in the painting there. And he'd sit up like this, and I'd take the chain off, and he'd come into the house with me. Well, I went out to take the garbage out that night, and I rounded the house, and there was the ghost of this dog sitting on that military-type doghouse. I stood there and watched it for a few seconds, and I started to go towards it, but it disappeared. I backed up, and it came back into view again. Now, being in this work, I realized that I should have just stayed right there. I walked in, and I got Lorraine, and I got Judy here, brought them out. I didn't tell them what they were going to see, and this is what they seen. If we could throw a camera on that painting over there, that's exactly how he looked when I seen him sitting on that doghouse. And Lorraine also.
Was he solid like that, Ed?
No, he was transparent.
Transparent.
He was transparent, but there was no doubt in my mind of what we were looking at. The three of us all seen it, and I was waiting patiently for the next night. I wanted to see if he would return.
Yeah.
Not only wasn't the dog there, but neither was the doghouse.
What happened?
The old man next door who would take care of Major for us took the military-type doghouse, built it into a tiny doghouse for two puppies I got for Lorraine. But that was the last night that the doghouse would be there. And we've always had a feeling that Major was in our home and on the grounds. This was a wonderful animal. It was almost human, I have to tell you. And we attribute a lot of our luck in this work and everything to that dog. Because it was because of that dog that we bought the small cottage up in Monroe, Connecticut. So that while we were away, the old man down the street would take care of him, bring him in at night, and we'd be gone a week or two at a time. And it was because of that dog that we started our studio, our painting studio. We're both artists. And then one of the students, a man who was a manager of a bank, had suggested that we show the paintings of my hauntings that I had painted. And that was the start of, you know, our public image.
Lorraine, I'd like to just touch on a point, if I could, about the psychic ability of animals. Now, do you believe that animals have psychic ability?
Oh, I have no doubt whatsoever, Tony. I have no doubt. I also feel that we, as individuals, as humans, have the ability to heal them through spiritual means. I believe that we can do that. I pray all the time, as I pray for my family, Tony, I pray every night to St. Francis for our animals and for any animal who needs our prayers. And it is amazing. Of course, I have a lot of devotion to St. Francis, and it's amazing the situations that we find ourselves in regarding saving the lives of animals. And we'll say, I know that he must have directed us in this area. But regarding their psychic ability, when we are involved in certain cases, I've walked in the house after being involved in real bad cases where the dogs and the cat will actually walk backwards away from us. And they sense and know your emotions. They sense your feelings. They're very loving and caring. When you need them, they always seem to be right there for you. They seem to sense even more than people will sense just how you feel at given times.
It's like an unconditional kind of love.
It is, Tony.
I have a very interesting thing to talk about here about Benny here. Now, Judy adopted Benny here. How many years ago?
I've had him 8 years.
8 years. Now, she had Benny for 8 years, but she had a Pekingese dog before that. And this little dog, he was a terror. When it got dark, all of a sudden this dog would be attacking everybody. And Benny here does the very same thing and acts just like this dog. Now, tell us a little bit about how the both dogs react the same way, Judy.
You'd never realize it by looking at them.
No, not now you wouldn't.
Not now you wouldn't.
Not now. Well, a certain time of night when it gets dark and no one can come near me, no one can come in the house, he'll growl
Same as
and
Goober.
he'll jump after them.
And your other dog used to do the same thing?
The exact same thing. Yeah, and
So you
normally
think-
he's just a friendly little dog all during the day. If you take him out in public, he's friendly. It's just at night he just turns and
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your host, Tony Sparrow, along with Ed and Lorraine Warren tonight. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a little frightening. Frightening in the sense that it happened in a small town of West Pittston, Pennsylvania. And what happened in that small town curls my hair when I think about what happened to Jack and Janet Smurl, just a regular family that worked hard and tried to make a living for their family. It was a nightmarish experience. Happened approximately 10 years ago, 1986. There is a book on it that was written about the case, The Haunted, by Ed and Lorraine Warren and Robert Curran. Ed and Lorraine will talk about this case tonight, but I have to say that it's probably one of the most frightening cases I've ever read about, because the horrible attacks that happened to Jack and Janet, you just don't want to go to bed at night. So I'd like to open this show with Ed Warren, if I could, and he would explain how he got called and how he got involved in the case. Ed, can you tell us how you started?
Yeah. I also would like to mention that this was a movie of the week. And that movie was done beautifully. The Smurl family insisted that there be no fabrication in that movie at all, no Hollywood hype. And it was one of the most frightening cases we've ever been involved in. But I'll never forget the family calling us up, us driving up to West Pittston, and going in. And as a religious demonologist, I do carry relics of saints. I carry a true piece of the cross. And about half hour after I interviewed this family, they told us amazing things. First, how when they moved into the home with the grandparents, this was a duplex house, as you'll see. It's in a coal mining area. And they felt, well, maybe something was happening underneath because of the old mine shafts. But the things that were happening would be when Janet would go down into the basement to do the wash. And she'd hear somebody calling, Janet, Janet. And she thought, sounds like my mother. So she'd run all the way upstairs. She said, yes, Mom, what is it you want? No mother there. And then she would hear strange sounds from the different corners of the cellar. One of her daughters was making Holy Confirmation. This is a religious rite in Catholicism. And the girl came into the kitchen, and they were all excited about going to the church and having the confirmation. There's a huge light up on the ceiling.
Now that is bolted to the main beams that are in the kitchen, Tony. That light, big, heavy bolts right into the main beam.
Now this light started to just shake, tore itself loose, and almost hit the girl. That, of course, was very unnatural. They checked everything. There was no way that that should have come off there. Then there was all kinds of trouble with the electric. Everything was going kaplooey. Television sets, toasters were burning. Wiring that they had just put in the house was just going dead. They couldn't understand it because Jack's father is an electrician. He put all of this in himself in his own house. And you know, a man that does his own home, he's got to do a good job. Well, from that point on, they lying in bed one night, and all of a sudden the bed starts to rattle and shake. Then they start seeing black shadows moving across the bedroom. Jack and Janet are lying in bed, and suddenly she's talking, and something grabs her by the leg and yanks her right out of the bed onto the floor. Jack at first didn't believe all these things until he heard the voices himself. He's seen his wife being dragged out of bed. Then there's the night when both of them are lying in bed, and both of them rise up into the air, up as high as the ceiling.
Just like the Lutz family
Just
in
like the Lutzes.
Amityville, Long Island, Tony.
And they're dropped onto the bed. We went there, and a half hour after I was there, I used religious provocation. We went up into their bedroom.
Yeah, let me tell you about that. We sat on the edge
Why
of the
can't I
bed.
tell them?
We sat on the edge of the bed.
You could repeat it later if you'd like.
And we sat on the edge of the bed, and Ed put out these different things he had with him, which were all relics and things like that. And he put them on the
I
bed.
was also
Don.
playing hymns from nuns, you know, beautiful music.
Religious music.
Yes,
Ave
religious
Maria,
music.
Things that would really frustrate a devil.
Why?
That's what I was trying to do.
Why would that?
We were both born in Bridgeport. He was a twin. We were both born in Bridgeport. My family moved to Milford. We didn't move back to Bridgeport again until after my brother had been hit by a car and was in St. Vincent's for a very long time. That brought us back to Bridgeport. I was, you could say I was brought up sheltered. I mean, I was in Laurelton, and I was brought up sheltered. Then we moved, when we moved to Bridgeport, my family got involved a great deal with St. Charles, and that was like a real all-Irish parish at that time. And they were very much involved with the church. Mama was, and so was Dad. And so as a result of that, we, you know, we kind of yearned to go back to Milford. We did. We loved Milford. And, you know, living in the city was not what we were used to. But Mom always was a decorator. Our house always really looked lovely. And so this one night, a group of girls from CYO wanted to take me to the movies. They wanted to know if I could go to the movies. We were just all getting acquainted. And so I asked my parents, and they said, you know, that was fine, you know. So on the way, they told me they wanted to introduce me to this boy. That did not interest me at all. I had a lot of other things on my mind than boys. And I'd never thought, really, that I would ever meet a boy that could compare with my brother and my father. To me, they were rough, tough, and these city boys, I just didn't like that. I didn't like that. I want to go back to Milford. So, anyway, we got to the movies, and just before we went in, they said, he's a lifeguard during the day. I said, who? This boy we want to introduce you to. And he is a usher at night at the theater. And I said, what? So I meet Ed. I look at Ed, from the shoes he's wearing that were very polished, to the Argyle socks he had on, to the crease in his pants, to that nice shirt and tie he was wearing. And I thought, what a well-groomed young man you are. That's how I evaluated him. Never been on a date. And so, anyway, this is going to be foreign to you, but there was an air raid. There was defense factories all over Bridgeport. and the enemy came pretty close at, I guess, one time. And so we had air raids, and we had an air raid. So we had to wait till all clear, and then we left. And with that, he's walking out with us. But he knew these girls, he knew them. And we were all the same age. And he said, I just got paid. I'll buy all you girls a Coke. I don't drink Coke. I ordered an ice cream soda, and my husband told me all my life, he knew I was a gold digger from the first day when I ordered an ice cream soda, and all the other girls ordered a nickel Coke. So he walked along home with us, but his house was first. And as he ran across the street to go up the steps into his home, I didn't see that young, athletic, 142-pound kid. I seen my husband as he looked just before he collapsed. And I wrote, I'll spend the rest of my life with him. I began seeing auras in Lawton Hall in grade school. I suppressed these things. I didn't know what they meant. I could see it upset my family. It definitely upset the nuns. And I had to pay kind of a price for that, you know. I didn't know what that meant. I thought everybody could see these lights, but nothing like what happened when I met him. I never told Ed for a long time what I wrote in that diary. And then I showed him. He called it entrapment. So, kidding. And so, anyway, from then on, Ed entered the military. He tried to get in when he was 16. He forged. And his father found out. His dad had been a state trooper and found out, was very angry. His brother was in the islands in the Pacific.
Philippines?
Huh?
Philippines?
No, well, he's further out than that, New Guinea. His brother was in New Guinea. He had just lost his best friend. Just a while before that, at Pearl Harbor. And he must have thought an awful lot of that man, that young boy, because they had been friends for a long time, and he lost him. He must have been a couple of years older than Ed, too. And so I came home from school one day, and Ed and this man, Bob Thompson, another friend of his, who was going into the military with him. This was never talked about. And they were sitting at the kitchen table with my mother. And I thought, that's strange. And now, I never really, went on dates with Ed. He would go with us, and my parents and brother and sister, we'd go on picnics, and different things like that we would do. Now, then one time he asked my mother and dad if he could take me to the movies. And my father said, you can, but you can't drive her, so you're going to have to walk to the movies. And we did. And then on the way back from the movies, that was in downtown Bridgeport, the Los Polis, and then he was telling me how he used to work there. And when we got by Dr. Murray's house, he said, can I kiss you goodnight here, because I know I can't do it when I can bring you home. And that was the first time he kissed me. And now when I came home this day, see, he never told me he grew up in a haunted house. He never told me he was enlisting in the military. He never told me anything like that. He never told me that his father was the one who stopped everything because he had forged to get in. He never told me any of that stuff. None of that kind of stuff did he ever tell me. And so as the result of that, I said, "Why are you here?" He said, "This is Bob Thompson." I says, "Hi, Bob." He says, "We're going in the Navy." I says, "You're going in the Navy?" I says, "Wow." I says, "You mean on ships?" He says, "Yeah, I guess I'm going to be on a ship." So as a result of this whole thing, he stayed there, and I found out, you know, that they were going to finally let him enter on his 17th birthday. Ed made 4 crossings across the North Atlantic before he ever turned 18 years old, under fire, active duty. He was a gunner. I can only imagine, he didn't talk too much about stuff, you know, but I can only imagine what it had to be. But then my appendix ruptured while he was in service. And I didn't have much chance of survival. They didn't want to operate on me. And my parents, I know, oh God, what beautiful people. They are the most beautiful people in the world, honest. They were horribly upset when my appendix had ruptured. And my aunt, Daddy's sister, Julia Moran, was a head nurse. And she told them to go along with the surgery. So I was operated on. I had drains in me for a very long time. And I was home. My mom decided, something she had never done, she decided to take a job where she was doing something for defense. And Daddy worked for Connecticut Light and Power. My brother and sister were in school, and I was sitting at the dining room table writing a letter to Ed. And with this, his dad phoned, and he was able to tell his dad the name of the ship that he was on. And the father called to tell me. So I'm writing a letter. There was a program in the 40s called Make Believe Ballroom. And I was listening to it, and they broke in to say that 2 ships had collided, and there were very few survivors. Ed's ship was one of them.
Oh my gosh.
And I was scared. I was crying, and the elderly woman next door came over. She just happened to come over, and she was there with me. His father stopped. His father came over to our house, and my mother came home and all. And as a result of this, they never listened. They kept telling the survivors. His name never came up as a survivor. And so finally, we made, his dad and I, we made phone calls. They were bringing the bodies, and they were bringing the victims. Burns were mostly burning to death, or it was February 5th in the North Atlantic, so you can imagine what that was like. And it was really one of the coldest days. So in New York it was. We found him at the Marine Hospital on Staten Island, and that's where he had been brought. And his father says, "I'm going down in the morning." I said, "So am I." And my parents said, "I don't know how you can possibly go down." I was taped from here to here. They took me down to the doctor, the surgeon, that operated on me. And he strapped me all up. Anyway, then we took, I forget what kind of, like a ferry, I think, over to Staten Island. I think it was like a ferry that we took. And Ed became a hero. He saved the life of a young Mexican kid. And that guy didn't swim. Ed never knew how he ever got in the Navy. And Ed told him to get on his back, to get on Ed's back. Ed was a phenomenal swimmer. That Beersley Park, go right underwater, back and forth. There, that's where he was the lifeguard in Beersley Park. He was an excellent swimmer. Of course, an excellent swimmer.
In the ice-cold North Atlantic.
Yes, and it was the ice that was killing some of them. And it was also the flames.
Do ghosts really exist? When Carmen and Alan Snedeker moved into their suburban home in Connecticut, they thought it was perfect. Little did they know what evil lurked inside the woodwork. They say their new house, which was once a funeral parlor, was haunted by ghosts. One of the children slept downstairs in the basement, which used to be the morgue. There, a gruesome blood-stained wall remained, along with a chain-powered body lift, once used to bring corpses from the basement to the first floor. Night after night, the family says they heard strange voices, loud music and haunting footsteps in the house, yet no one was there. Then the most chilling thing happened to Carmen while she slept next to her husband. She says she was raped and sodomized by a grotesque demon who jumped on her in bed. The Snedekers tried to get help from their neighbors and even the police, but no one seemed to listen. Finally, in a desperate cry for help, they found real-life Ghostbusters who advised them to move out immediately. The Snedekers say they've never been back since. You're probably saying to yourself about now, well, this story sounds crazy. But my guest today insists it's true. Meet Al and Carmen Snedeker. They are here with their son, Michael, and their niece, Kelly. Later in the show, we'll talk with neighbors, including one who now lives in the very same house the Snedekers claim is haunted. He says that Al and Carmen are making up the story. Carmen, we're going to start with you. You moved into this house in the first place because your son Stephen was in the middle of receiving treatments for cancer at a local hospital. And the house you moved into was a former funeral parlor. Can you take us through the layout of the house?
Yes, as you came in the front door, there was a beautiful wood entrance with an excellent hall stairway that went up to the second apartment. That's the apartment I saw first before I moved in. I didn't know it was a funeral home. When I came in the first time, the downstairs was full of workmen and woodworking things, of lumber and hammering things going on. So I saw the upstairs apartment. I didn't realize it was a funeral home. As you go through the hallway, to your left was what used to be the chapel, was our dining room. In the back of it was the kitchen. There was a back door. As you walked out the back door, there were French doors. If you'd go in those French doors, it led down into the basement or into our bedroom. When you went into the basement, there was the morgue and where they prepared the bodies. The hoist went up into our bedroom above us. There was a blood tank to the right of the staircase. And then as you walked through there was the sink where they flushed the blood and things of that nature, and they prepared the bodies, and there was makeup and wax and things like that in there. There were 3 coffin pillows. Then as you come through, there was a tool room where they kept the little head things, where they put the name of the person, little metal plaques. You went on through, that was the north coffin room. That's where my son Stephen slept. That was his bedroom. You made a right, you went into the south coffin room. That's where Michael slept. As you go up the stairs, you go directly into the bathroom. Back around, there's a U shape into a beautiful living room with a sunroom. There were over 22 windows. Then there were 2 more bedrooms, Kelly and My daughter and other niece slept in the other one.
Carmen, although your children told you they heard strange sounds and noises and they saw ghosts, you didn't believe them at first?
No, I didn't believe them. I didn't believe in ghosts. I thought that they were things of imagination. I'd always been taught that. My oldest boy, Stephen, came to me the day we moved into the house, and he said, "We have to leave here immediately. The house is evil. It's really evil. Something bad's going to happen if we stay." I told him that houses could not be evil, because I didn't believe they could.
What changed your mind?
My mind was changed over a year later when Kelly and Trish moved in with us. One night after a date, Kelly came into the house.
Kelly's your niece?
Yes, Kelly is right beside me. She came in from a date, and she tried to go into her bed, and something started happening to her, and she came to our bedroom where I was sleeping, and she said, Aunt Carmen, come quick. It's coming again, it's happening again." I grabbed my Bible from the nightstand, and I'm saying to myself, I've got to find something to put all of these ghost stories to rest. I've had it up to here with ghost stories. I didn't believe in them. I'd never seen anything, and I thought it was all because it was a former funeral home.
Now, Kelly, you're the niece. You came to live with your aunt.
Yeah.
And you say you were molested by an entity. Tell me about that.
Well, it all started when
She came home from a date.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Kelly came in from a date, and she went into her bedroom, and she tried to lay in bed, and she felt something come up underneath the covers towards her, and it was pulling at her undergarments and touching her in her private areas. She reached over for her rosary, and the cross came off. That's when she got up and ran into the room with me. A few other things happened to her. I'll let her tell you about them if she can.
The covers would be pulling off the bed. There would be voices, a lot of scratching on the walls. The bed didn't always do it. It did it more in Aunt Carm's room than anywhere, but it would, like, breathe, kind of like.
Kelly, what did the apparition look like? Did it?
It
did you see
didn't
a full
have a
person?
form. It was just a black mass.
Just a black mass.
Yeah.
Was there a hand? You said you felt something.
I felt it. You couldn't see it. I couldn't see it because it was behind me, but it was like a huge. It was just freezing cold. It was like a hand on my back, and it would just like when I was laying on this side, and this bra strap would always be pulled down. And I always slept in my undercloak, my bra and stuff when I went to bed. That's just, and it would be being tugged down, and you'd pull it back up, and usually, when you're laying on that side, that just doesn't happen. And I got up to get the rosary, and I laid back down in the bed, and when I did that, my hand, I was holding the rosary in my hand, and it was like something was, trying to open my hand up, and it would start pulling on my covers, pulling them to the floor. And then after that happened, I got up and ran into Aunt Carm's room, and she got up to come in with me. She brought her Bible. This had happened before, something similar. And she didn't believe me. She'd just bring the Bible in, and she would sit down, and she would start telling me the Hail Mary out the rosaries and reading the Bible and trying to calm me and talk to me and tell me I was just having nightmares or something.
I truly didn't believe her. I thought that the older boy had gotten her all excited about the stories of the funeral home and the ghost he had seen. When I went into her bedroom, I sat with her and I was opening it and reading from the Bible, and she wrapped around me. She was so excited. "Can you feel it coming? Can you feel it coming, Aunt Carmen? It's coming." And I pushed her back. And the third time she did that and I pushed her back, I saw an arm, the knuckles, the joints, and the wrist, go up under her long nightshirt, up over her breast, and back through the wall. At that point, I realized something was going on. I grabbed her, ran into what used to be the chapel to use the phone, and there's where I called.
All right, Al, you say strange things were happening to you and Carmen at night when you were in bed. In order to fully understand, we want you to show us what happened. We have a bed here today that is about the size of the bed, which was in the house. So we're going to set the scene. Now, you're about ready to tuck in for the night when all of a sudden you hear music like this. What happened next?
Well, Sally, the music would wake me up at night. I'd be sound asleep. I would hear the music playing, and I would say to myself, what is that? And I would lie there for 5 or 10 minutes and listen to it. Along with the music, I could hear 3 or 4 voices. They were older men chatting back and forth, back and forth.
What did you initially think the music was?
It sounded like
or
30s music from an old Victrola player.
He thought someone was in the house when all of this was going on, and he...
I used to get up every night, go down the stairs. First couple times, I would just go down and start looking. But each time I went down, I started getting more and more nervous and afraid for some reason. I started bringing a baseball bat with me. I started going through the boys' room, through the coffin room area where the chain body lift was.
No one is playing the radio, and the boys are asleep, and they're in their
everybody
bed.
would be sound asleep. It got to the point where I got so afraid when I was going down there, I started bringing a gun with me. And one night I woke Carmen up. I said, Carmen, I said, I got to stop doing this. I'm afraid I'm going to shoot one of our children.
Wow. He was really afraid that one of the kids would be standing up in the room when he'd go around the corner, and he would fire because he was so frightened himself. And he'd come back up and to get into bed. Now, when we used to get into bed, it only happened to us not at the same... Yeah, we were never awake at the same time. But the bed would begin to vibrate. And it would be a gentle vibration at first, and it got worse and worse. There were other things that happened. The bed, as Kelly said, had a pulse and a heartbeat.
Like a heartbeat, yeah.
And when you were in your bed, it would come and lift the covers and tug at them.
But there was a pulse and a heartbeat in the bed.
In the bed, and you could feel it. Someone else could go up and touch it and feel it. People that had not lived in the house. And we had this thing that would walk around the bed. It had really small feet, like a cat. We didn't have a cat. It would walk around the bed, and if it sat down, it would be as an adult male sitting, the impression of the bed.
The feet were light, but the weight of what happened
The feet
on
were
bed.
about the size of this, a cat's feet.
Al, you said something else happened to you that is very difficult to talk about even today. Can you share it with us?
Yes. One night, we were lying in bed. Carmen had already had fallen asleep. I felt this strange sensation coming over my body. It started at my feet and started climbing up through my body. Before I had a chance to reach over to Carmen to tell her something was wrong, I was froze. I couldn't move. And then I felt this stinging penetration in my anal area. And I was trying to scream, to cry out to Carmen to help me somehow, and I couldn't move. After a while, I don't know how long, it had gone away. There was no more sensation. I woke Carmen up, and I said, Carmen, I think I was just sodomized by this demon.
This happened to me as well, Sally. It was a tedious kind of pain that happened. It was horrible pain. It was so penetrating and so much pain. There was no pleasure in this. And when it would take me, sexually assault me, it would laugh with such pleasure. It enjoyed what it was doing to me, and I was so terrified I couldn't move. It was the most crippling thing I've ever been through in my life, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Now, Michael, you actually saw ghosts? What did they look like to you?
It took different forms. When I seen it, I would see it in different shapes. The first time I seen the ghost, it appeared in cat-like eyes glowing up on the ceiling, looking down at my bed. And the second time I seen it, it appeared as my little sister. The lights were taken out of the sockets on the ceiling. And I looked over, because they were flashing on and off, and there was no bulbs in there. And I looked over, and it looked like my sister, and she was laughing at it when she was flicking off the switch like that. And then I got up to go over to her, and she went running up the stairs. And I went into the living room where my mom and cousin were, and I asked them if Jenny just came running through, and they said, no, she's been in bed all night. And I said, 5 minutes ago, she was down in my room turning on and off the lights.
And you knew that that wasn't so. Did it have a voice, any kind of a strange?
It had several voices. Sometimes it would take on the voice of one of the children to come into the room. It would say, Mommy, Mommy, and it would be the sweet voice of your child. And you turn, and there would be this dark presence of of a smoke figure just standing there laughing at you. And then other times it had the deep, raspy voice where it would insult and shout profane things and insult you. It was horrible.
When we come back, we're going to hear more about this bizarre story, and we'll hear just how desperate the Snedekers were trying to get rid of the evil spirits. They called the neighbors, called the police, and no one was willing to help. But they did find a solution, and we'll find out what it was when we return. Family, Carmen says 4 years ago she moved into a house that was formerly a funeral parlor. And Carmen says it was haunted and terrible things happened to her and her family. Carmen, I have to ask you, why did you just pick up your family and leave?
Sally, that would have been the first choice we would have had, but every time we did leave the house, it would follow us. I'd go to work, and the computer system would go down, or the phone system would go down. The people at work are the ones that gave me the phone number to the people that finally helped me. My husband went to work. His car, he parked and went inside the building. As he did, the car started back up and drove into the building. We didn't want our family members harmed by whatever was harming us. It was bad enough.
Carmen, I'd like to ask you, how many children do you have, and were they all affected?
We have 4 children and 2 nieces, and everyone was affected, along with
And
some
where are
friends.
the other children now?
They're young. There's a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old that I want to protect, and the oldest one's in school in Massachusetts.
They were kind of scared or nervous, to be honest.
Oh, terrified.
One of them was given drugs or taken to a psychiatric hospital?
Yes, that was the oldest boy. I didn't believe that anything he was telling me was true. I asked his oncologist, who had been treating him, if that could be a side effect from the cancer treatments he was receiving. They said no, so I took him to a psychologist.
Was there any medical evidence that either of you had been raped? Did you go to a doctor and get physically examined?
Why would we? I mean, we couldn't see it. How did we expect anyone else to believe us?
But you felt a stinging pain?
It wasn't like a normal rape, not person-to-person type.
Carmen, there was one point where you say you actually were possessed by a demonic force, and you, Al, say you witnessed it. Can you tell us about it?
This was one of the most terrifying events that happened in the house. I've drawn some sketches, if I may. We had been outside just kidding around. The researchers were in the house, my husband, my niece, and upon going back to bed, I sat down and I was no longer in my room. I was in a dark room. I don't know if you can catch this on camera. I was in complete darkness. I couldn't feel the temperature of my skin. I couldn't hear myself speak. I couldn't see anything but blackness. I knew I was no longer in my room. The entity opened up a hole, and he started shouting obscenities at me. And when I began to pray the Our Father, he got worse. And he said, there's no way you could possibly believe what you've been taught as a child. I went into this place. It was called Ithram, a desert road of hot tears, and I was taken down this road. These represent souls, lost souls. I could actually feel the emotion, the anger, the hurt, the desperation, the sadness. There were no positive emotions. They were all human, negative emotions. And they were palatable. They just went through my skin. I knew it. I felt such compassion for these souls. But I couldn't leave the road. I was warned against it. I was there for 8 hours.
Has there ever been any research or anything saying, you know, trying to find out who exactly these spirits were?
Yes.
Yes.
We had some researchers come in on the night that I discovered that there were other entities in the house. I called some people called the Warrens. Someone at work had told me that she believed the things my children were telling me was true, and she asked me to go to Ed and Lorraine's museum with her. She gave me their number to call and make an appointment. I never did. I just kept the number in my wallet. That night I called it.
And did they help you?
They stayed with us for 9 weeks.
9 weeks?
9 weeks, every night. Every night.
And there was also somebody else who went in and documented all this?
They're researchers. They had 3 researchers that came in the house and stayed 9.5 weeks. They worked during the day. They did not accept any pay for what they did for us. And they experienced phenomena from the very first night they walked into our house.
You know definitely that it is a male spirit?
No, there is no gender in the spirit's world. There's... These were called incubus and succubus, but I'll let the researchers tell you more about that later on.
Later, we're going to meet the Ghostbusters who helped Carmen and her family, but next, the neighbors we found while investigating this case who say, gee, they don't believe a word of the Snedeker story. Don't go away.
That you were molested. Now, were you ever molested outside of your home? Did they follow you? Like you said that they would follow you if you would leave.
One night I ran down the street with Kelly, being sodomized the whole way.
Yes, you had a question.
Hi, I was wondering what the police thought when you told them that.
The policeman almost shot my bedroom door when the door began to open by itself when he was in there.
And your question?
Well, Sally, I'd just like to know, if they were molested in their beds, why didn't you just leave that next morning? You have children to worry about.
Exactly.
Where can we go?
Anywhere.
Where can we go?
Anywhere. Not just a matter of that. What about the fact that everywhere we went,
it followed
us. And the other outsiders, should we drag in our parents, our grandparents, our nieces and nephews? We had larger families.
Take the chance that it would happen to them?
Around this time of year, we do hear a lot of tall tales about ghosts, goblins, things that go bump in the night. So far today, we've heard some pretty horrifying ghost stories that our guests claim are no tall tales. They're true. Carmen says as soon as she and her family moved into their new house, which used to be a funeral parlor, strange things began to happen. So far, we've heard about the music in the middle of the night, the voices out of nowhere, and some pretty serious accusations, including rape and sodomy by an evil spirit, whatever it is. While we were investigating this story, we came across some people who live in the Snedekers' old neighborhood. And they say they have some serious doubts about the Snedekers' story. In fact, they say the Snedekers are making the whole thing up. Meet Richard, Yvonne, and Jim. Richard, why don't you believe the Snedekers' story?
Well, I think the most obvious reason for me was the inconsistencies in it. We were moving into the Southington area from another town, found the apartment. We liked the apartment. I mentioned it to some coworkers who work in that town and live in that town. And, of course, the whole haunted house story came out with them.
Now, you moved into their apartment after they left?
Correct, the same one they were living in.
Oh, okay.
When all this was supposedly happening. I think I researched it with my wife. We talked to people. As a matter of fact, the close relatives of yours told me that there was nothing to it, that you were making it up just for the money.
Could you tell me which relative you spoke to? Because I have very few relatives in the area, and I had a relative of mine contact me saying that people that were living in there wanted an exorcism.
Wanted us to come there.
When was this?
This was a year ago.
I was living
now,
there.
let me ask you,
I was living there a year ago.
you on the dining room floor, do you see 5 toes and a heel and an imprint in red? Because it was there and did not leave.
On the dining room floor?
Yes.
No.
Is it hardwood?
It's hardwood floor. There is no impression.
There was when I left.
I've been through every part of the house. There have been
Is the body lift still there?
The body lift is out now. It was there.
It was there
originally,
when I
but
moved in.
It did nothing. I have small children myself, as a matter of fact. I have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and I have seen nothing that.
Richard,
that
I
you're saying.
really don't want any harm to come to you, but we did have an exorcism.
My question,
I've been there
I don't
3
think I'm
years.
lucky though. My question, my response to this is, if the ghost followed you down the street, you were so concerned that the ghost was going to harm your relatives, your friends, then the house wasn't haunted. The ghosts were
It
from
was
you.
after you, that's right.
Because I have
blame
had
the
nothing.
house.
I have not heard a creaking
That's
board.
right.
I have not heard anything.
that would suggest that that house is haunted whatsoever.
Let me talk to Yvonne.
Sally, can I just say one thing?
Obviously, the exorcism worked then. You're very lucky.
There was no exorcism. I don't think there was an exorcism.
Dig down 12 inches behind every corner of the house. 12 inches, there is an exorcism medal. And there are also other things that you can find there. There's all kinds in the storeroom. I cannot give you.
No, I talked
no
to
Catholic
priest
within like 100 miles of this place
has ever set foot in your house since the
last funeral was performed by the previous owners.
You know,
you people say you didn't know that it was a funeral home. The picture that was supplied by whoever that was taken last year, the sign that says funeral home, is still on the front of the house. If they show the picture,
she was showed the top apartment.
Cover up.
They were
by
remodeling.
signs on the front door.
They got pictures. The bottom floor.
They got pictures of you in the newspaper, which they also showed. Right next to you, right behind you.
It's right there.
If you look right behind you on the picture,
it's covered up with plywood. It's covered
up.
Not.
It was not covered up until this whole thing.
You did not live there when I did.
I did not know.
I have been there 3 years, lady.
I have other witnesses that did say
was brought up.
Why did this?
Nothing was ever said. Nothing was ever said until you got behind in your rent, and that's when it started.
No, you know what happened?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
You guys were both.
I have an attorney that will dispute that.
Yvonne, the landlord, you sent a check.
My
never
question
got there. You could never come
Okay,
out.
my question was around the same kind of thing. One, it sounds a little bit dramatized by the wife, the whole idea of the ghost and the spirits and everything. It sounds somewhat dramatic. I've heard people talk about ghosts and spirits, and I'm not saying that that can't happen, but it just sounds very, very dramatic.
It didn't happen here.
The way that you're explaining it. The other thing is I was wondering if you, one, if you have a book out, and two, if you were either behind in your mortgage or your rent, because that could be cause for the dramatization.
No.
Or that
no, that's not true.
No, we were not behind in our rent.
Yvonne, you were saying it was for money. Why?
Yes, that's what it is. Even the landlord said they got behind. He never had a problem until they got behind in the rent. Then all of a sudden...
The landlord knew there was a problem with that house.
No, the landlord didn't.
Wait a minute. If the landlord said there was a problem in the house...
Ask his daughter.
There was a lady living upstairs
Sally.
in the house. The whole time this was going on, there was an apartment upstairs. This lady got disgusted. She got moved out because she was disgusted with all the publicity that was going on.
What she experienced. She come to me and talked to me. Yes, she did. You were not there. You
I've been in that place.
She was there.
The researchers.
Yes.
And she allowed the priest in.
Then why did she tell the TV people that nothing happened? Why did she tell us that nothing happened? Why did she tell the newspaper that nothing happened?
She told me she had a reputation to uphold.
When I took this rent, I work at Food Mart, and Father Kabbalah, who's been a priest in the Immaculate Conception Church
in Southington,
he's the one that told us forget about it. 25 years,
Yeah.
And I told he was a friend of mine, and I said I'm moving in the Hallahan house. He said, Yvonne, there was never anything there.
That's baloney.
And I said, well, if there is, they're going to have to learn to live with me.
We went to him,
and he said,
we talked to him.
my
He said
money's
there was
on you,
nothing there.
Yvonne. Those were his exact words.
Sure.
I'm one of the neighbors,
in Southington, that's why.
and I don't believe in ghosts until some of this occurred. When I came home from work one night, I visited my neighbor next door. Her name was Joan, and I was very set back with the fact that all of a sudden her kids had crucifixes on, and she had crucifixes all over her house. And I asked her what the problem was, and she was extremely upset. At this time, she didn't want to tell me, and she was... Finally, I pried it from her. She had said to me that she had been in the Snedeker house. While she was there, she had been in the cellar. In the cellar, she had this very strong, pungent odor that made her very, very sick. She said she felt like throwing up and had to get out of there. Another time, on another occasion, she was sitting talking to Carmen. I believe it was in her dining room. I'm not 100% sure. It was the dining room or the kitchen. And she says while she was sitting talking to her, she felt something bite her or sting her on her backside or the thigh of her leg, and it was extremely painful. When she looked down, there was absolutely nothing there.
So you believe the Snedeker story because your friend believes it?
Well, I'll tell you, I was uncomfortable with things I saw. I did hear that one of the priests from one of the churches did go in there, and he did not believe what had gone in, but I did see other priests go in and out of there. I will be honest to say what I did see. And I did not experience anything other than that.
But your friend did?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm also a neighbor. And Joan and her husband
were to our next-door neighbor's house for a pool party when we were there. And when Joan went into the house to tend her babies, her husband said that there had been some funny things going on and that he was concerned for his wife. Well, this was in July. We had been hearing odd noises about 3 o'clock in the morning. So I decided to put a journal next to the bed and write down what went on during the night.
So you're a neighbor who everything that happened at night you would document?
Right. And I discovered that there were usually things going on in the neighborhood that explained the things they put in the newspaper.
Such as?
Oh, when the chains would rattle. One time at 3 o'clock in the morning, a car, in fact, there were 3 cars this particular night, the noise woke us up. And they would hide in the shadows of a tree down the street, and then they would come driving by. But if anything else came by, they would take off very fast, like they didn't want to be seen. One of the trucks had a bad muffler, and it really rattled our house as well as anybody else around. There were chains dragged.
So you're saying that
when
what we saw
heavier
was
trucks went down the road, around that time some repairs had been done in the road, and heavy trucks would come down, and when they'd hit this repair in the road, it would rattle all the houses around us.
Excuse me, I don't mean to be disrespectful.
How can
I
a
like
car make
this
that kind of
woman.
vibration?
But what we experienced was not a traffic problem. It was in the house. The floor would flutter. What about the covers coming off? What about the sodomization? What about the apparitions my children
saw? The whole
saw?
point, though, Sally, the whole point with this is, I have a 7- and a 6-year-old home. They have 4 kids or 5 kids that were in the house. If the board creaked in the house, I'd have my kids out of there that night. I don't care if I had to sleep on the street or in the car in a local motel. You're going to tell me that you experienced all this and you kept your kids there for 2 years?
Oh, we didn't.
That's ridiculous. Financially, I'm not financially well off, but I'll sleep on the
The priest they named in the newspaper as having come in and blessed the house and worked with them did not go into that house.
I'm sorry?
He had not been in that house since Mrs. Hallahan's funeral.
Who?
Priest.
Mrs. Hallahan is
when that article was in the newspaper naming
You
for
call
those
the archdiocese and you'll find out.
You should have cleaned your binoculars.
There is the sign that says Hallahan Funeral Home. This is a dated newspaper picture.
Ma'am, I hate to tell you, but it was covered up with a light over by plywood when I lived in that house and when I looked at it.
Not when you got there. It was not covered up till after it all started.
It was not.
That's wrong.
Next, we're going to meet the real-life Ghostbusters, who Alan Carmen say saved their lives when, along with a priest, they performed an exorcism in their house. See if we can figure out who the priest was. Take a break. Carmen and their family about a chilling story. They wrote a book about it called In a Dark Place, the story of a true haunting. And they wrote this book along with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who have been with us before. They are the professional Ghostbusters, who Alan Carmen said saved their lives. Ed, you both launched an investigation into the house, and you discovered a very shocking thing that actually happened in the funeral parlor involving the bodies. What happened?
Well, we feel through our investigation that necrophilia, or abuse of corpses, had occurred in that home. Not necessarily by the undertaker. It could be anybody that went in there. Now, this case is not as isolated as these 3 people would have us think. We have over 70 cases very similar to the Snedekers. And remember that the church was involved in this.
Who was the priest? Everyone seems to have a disagreement.
We can tell you that the chancellery was involved. The priest that was involved there was a Father A, who was on 2020. And there was also 3 other priests, and this can be borne out through the official records of the Chancellery in Hartford.
Yes.
How about a name? Just one name.
Father A is a name I give you. I don't have to give
a
you
name, a full name.
I can prove. These are secret things. We are Catholic,
if it's
and we
secret,
respect.
you're sitting here talking about being raped and sodomized by some sort of entity. but you
It
won't
was all
give a
backed
name.
up. It was all backed
what
up.
happened to me.
All
I'm not
backed up.
telling
We had
you.
seen
You gotta
this.
believe me.
We had
I am
investigators.
just telling you what
Were
happened.
you in the house?
No,
Were you in the
I was
house when it
standing.
was going
I
on?
lived across the street before you people
Were you in
moved
the
in, I
house when it
still
was
lived
going
there.
on?
One of the ones that came around the house go boo, boo through the window.
No, once you guys started doing this and it got to the paper.
Sounds like something you do.
Oh, very likely.
You're probably one of the guys I chased down the street.
I'd like to know how much you
Why would I
three,
run all the way down
and
the street
especially
when I live
you,
across the
are
street?
getting paid off by the landlord to do this kind of stuff. Because
You
you
do?
know
How
as
much
well
money
as
are
we
you
do,
making today?
You know as well as we do that what went on in that house actually occurred. We have the proof. We have people out here, investigators, who went through the same thing as the Snedekers.
Ed? I don't know what happened in the house and what didn't, but I lived next to the house for over 25 years, and I haven't been in there in over 15 years, but I do know that when they moved into the house, there was no sign that said Hallahan Funeral Home. The sign exists. It is, you know, to the right side of the door, but it was covered with plywood for years now. It's been covered up ever since the Hallahans moved out. It does not say Hallahan's Funeral Home on it anymore. And people moved into the home after the Snedekers left, and left very quickly after they did, before they moved in.
Okay, so there was an interim family that you think was disturbed too. Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, I have a question.
Jeff's another neighbor.
As you know, well, as you said before, your son had cancer, and he was taking many drugs.
Yes.
Did he or did he not tell you that he was also taking other illegal substances?
I'm aware that he did take other illegal
Because
substances.
he used to come over to our house and tell us that whatever we wanted, we could get and whatnot. He also...
I don't know what he told you, and I'm not aware of his teenage boyhoods, but I did take him to a psychologist, remember, and I did have a great deal of interest in what happened to my son, and he has grown up a great deal, and he told the psychologist, and to this day will still tell you, there were ghosts in the house.
But how
I
do you
think
not?
that these are all very contributing factors to why the phenomena was as intense as it was in that particular home. But realize
the ghost didn't like the use of drugs. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Drugs heighten the sensitivity. We know that when a person takes drugs, they're almost in the same state as a clairvoyant. But if you ask the gentleman who's sitting right over there, who spent 9 weeks in the house, what he had also had happened to him, similar attacks.
Where's
as
the
Al
gentleman?
Snedeker. Right there.
Yes. What happened to you?
We were there for 9.5 weeks trying to help Carmen and Snedeker. When we go in on these cases, we have to document...
Who's we?
The researchers. I work with Ed and Lorraine, doing their investigating. I'm one of the persons that was in there for the 9.5 weeks. I'm amazed at hearing all these people that weren't even in the home. You weren't there. You weren't witness to it. A neighbor sitting here with a book, a whole journal, stating on what took place in this case. She documented things around the clock. Why didn't you come over to see if you could help the family? Why don't you see if you could offer some help? You're saying there was no priest there. I know there was priest there. The Roman Catholic Church was involved with this. Now you want us to turn around and give you the name of the priest. He prefers to stay anonymous.
They said was there.
No,
he
you
said
don't.
he was
No, you
not
don't.
there. I said I have the
in the
newspaper
newspaper.
clipping with his name
I've never
in it.
publicized
And he
one
said
time.
that he was not there. But
Can
they
I see
had it published. They also published that they were not writing a book and were not going to
We
write a
weren't
book.
at the time, lady.
We
Well,
were
you
approached
sure
2 years
did.
later. We insisted that it would be good for them to write a book because people like these out here would know that there is help for them if this ever occurred to them.
Sally,
you know,
I have to this journal around the clock, but I have license
made a
plate
journal
numbers,
too, but I didn't bring
descriptions
it
of the
with me.
vehicles, and
It's
when
on a
kids
computer
were
disk.
pestering you, yelling in your windows, we called the police. The Poolers called the police. Other neighbors called the police.
I know.
And we
I have
caught
respect
kids
for that.
messing around the house.
Yes, and I appreciate that. I have
So then
great
you know what we
respect
went
for
through.
you.
Carmen, let me ask this woman.
it?
Let me get this woman's opinion.
I'd like to know why you think that they would fabricate something so absurd to get money when there's other ways of getting money. And I also don't think it's right that you demean their son for doing drugs. And there are a lot of kids who have problems, and it doesn't happen just in people's houses who supposedly have ghosts.
Okay, answer.
The point I was trying to make was that some of the drugs he was taking would allow him to see things.
Hallucinogenic?
Exactly. LSD.
But supposedly it was not only one son who saw it, it was the whole family.
That's right.
Just because one son is doing drugs does
Now
not
we
mean
were
the
all
whole
on
family is going to be
LSD?
affected by it and see it.
What about my three? Okay, neighbors. Do you want to answer? Go ahead.
I was just going to, he said what I was going to say. You know, you take a lot of drugs, you start to see funny
The whole
things.
family was on drugs?
My 3-year-old
Come
son
on.
was
Philip
was
was
not there
kids.
the whole time. He wasn't there. He was put into...
Do you know that the priests who went into that house had experiences so bad in their own rectories that they wouldn't even go back into that house again?
Sally,
And the home was exercised.
Let's get to Lorraine. We'll take a break and we'll be right back.
Who you are, and you...
Who is a skeptic on this whole matter? Joe, you say the investigations the Warrens conducted is baloney. Why?
Well, I've investigated haunted houses for some 20 years and a professional
Is there
psychologist.
such a thing?
Pardon?
Is there such a thing?
I've not met a house that I thought was haunted. I think the Warrens have never met a house that they didn't think was haunted.
I think that you are mistaken.
I was on the show with
pattern.
this man once before.
It's my turn.
You made a statement.
I've heard that you were a
You have a
loudmouth who
statement.
shouted people down. Just give me my chance to
No, I
talk.
won't give you a chance.
You did that to me last show we
Say
were
a bunch
on.
of lies.
Joe,
We
I'll
have
give
the
you your
evidence, we have the
chance.
proof.
You're a loudmouth, Warren, and
No,
we
you're
all
the
all
loudmouth.
know it, but if you'll just let me finish.
When you're concerned, I'm a loudmouth.
Go ahead, Joe.
Try to
You
show
haven't heard nothing.
a little
Joe,
class.
I
You're
don't
on
have a
national
lot
TV.
of time.
No, I'm not going to
Just-
give class to somebody who's
Ed,
sitting here.
let
You'll
Joe,
have nothing but
Ed,
lying.
Ed, let Joe just explain
Be careful who you
point
call
by
a
point.
liar.
Well, what
Go
would you do
ahead.
about it?
Guys, Joe, point by point.
Yes, one thing that the houses that sincere people report that they think are haunted usually follow certain patterns. This is a hodgepodge of the sort of ghost tale, poltergeist, part demon, part
you
this,
there?
part that.
Were you there?
We saw a similar pattern with the Amityville Horror, a case that the Warrens thought was genuine.
We didn't
It
think,
turned
we know.
out it turned out to be a blatant
Nobody
hoax
ever proved that.
concocted over
Nobody
several
ever
bottles
proved
of
it.
wine.
Can
the
you
evidence,
prove it?
yes, I
No,
can
you
prove
can't.
it. Yes,
You
I
cannot
can.
prove
It's
it.
been proven.
No, it has never
The
been
evidence
proven.
is very clear in the case of the Amityville Horror.
No,
And the whole
no way.
packaging of this story, the book says it's for Halloween release. The book was written by a professional fiction writer who writes horror stories.
Joe,
This
does the
whole
church-
packaging is a
does the-
crock.
Joe, does the church admit to exorcism?
He's an atheist. How would he know?
According to a newspaper article that I have, the Bridgeport newspaper, the diocese refuses to confirm that they had any exorcism there.
It wasn't
if there
done by
was,
the
if
operative
there
Sally,
was
I
an
have a
exorcism,
tape of
I
an
don't understand
exorcism
why
from a
there is
priest.
any reason why they can't
wasn't
come out
done
and
for
say so.
Bridgeport.
We've
I don't
had
understand
priests
the
on
need
the
for
show
secrecy.
when we've talked about exorcism.
If I
Take a
can
break.
prove
We'll be
that
right
there
back.
wasn't exorcism,
But the sheer fact that this family, in their hearts and in their minds, believe that this happened has to be overwhelming, and my heart goes out to you, whether it happened or not.
Thank you.
you very much.
Yes.
Well, I really feel like the only thing missing from your description of your first trip into the house is a corpse. I mean, blood on the walls and wax and makeup. And you also sound like you're reading a script. I'm not saying spirits and ghosts don't exist, but you sound so rehearsed.
Oh, I'm sorry
Next.
that you feel that
Yeah,
way.
I was wondering, you've been talking about two different kinds of ghosts coming in. Are they either male or female, or is it always a male that's in your home?
No, ghosts have no gender, I don't think. I'm not sure, but I don't believe they have a gender.
Yes.
I would like to know if you bought this house by a real estate agent, and if this real estate
We didn't buy
agent
it.
ever told you anything.
It was rented, and no, they did not tell us anything.
Question.
Yes, I'd like to know if y'all still being haunted by these ghosts.
No, we're not. The exorcism apparently worked. Our audience does not believe. Thanks to my guests, and whatever you believe about the story, the book is worth picking up. It's called...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Sparrow, with hosts Ed and Lorraine Warren, and also tonight we have a special guest, Mr. John Zaffis. He's also a psychic investigator who has worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren for over 20 years. And tonight's program will be about a haunted home, but unlike any home that you've ever been in, unlike any home that you've ever witnessed or read about, except in one of Ed's and Lorraine's books, for it is a haunted funeral home. One that happened right in our own backyard of Southington, Connecticut in 1988, the home of Carmen and Al Snedeker. Now, this home was haunted by different kinds of spirits that we'll get into. We'd like to start the program immediately off with Ed and Lorraine and also with John, because John spent, I believe he'll explain, about 9 weeks in that home, day and night. So I'd like to start it out with Ed, if I could. Ed, can you tell us about the case, how it started, how you got involved?
Well, of course, we got involved through Mrs. Snedeker, who called our home and told us that she was terribly frightened, that things were occurring to them, that they were seeing ghosts, they were being physically hurt, even attacked sexually. And when she told me that it was a funeral home, I suspected that what they call necrophilia, which would be an abuse of a dead body, occurred. Now, in this particular funeral home, we don't feel that it was the undertakers that did this. You have itinerant embalmers from time to time who will help out these people. We think it was one of them. But what happened was that a body was abused, or maybe more than one. And we know that this can bring about terrible phenomena and hauntings in such a house. It seems that this lady, Mrs. Snedeker, lived up north, northern New York. She had a young son. I think he was around 15 years old. He had cancer, and she wanted to get him closer to New Haven, Hartford area. So she brought the boy down here, and he went into the hospital, but it was very hard for them to drive over 100 miles every time they had to bring the boy back and forth. So she looked for a rent, and she came across this house one day. She could see builders in there. They were loading lumber, taking things out, fixing it all up. She had no idea that this was a funeral home at one time. And she walked in, and she asked the workers there if it was going to be a rent, and they said yes. She asked who owned it, and she called the owner, and she told him that she would like to rent it. Well, he never told her that it was a funeral home. And down in the basement, on the bottom floor, the instruments they use for embalming, the embalming table, the chain hoist, everything was still there. But there was lumber all over the stairs, so Mrs. Snedeker couldn't get down those stairs to see what was down there. They just told her that everything would be cleared up by the time she moved in, and they could live down there. There was also what they called the sales coffin room, where they put the caskets, and these would be
like a display room.
Wow. That's what they called it, a playroom. It was
display room, honey.
And it did wind up to be a playroom for the kids, though. The son actually slept down there, not knowing that this was a coffin display room. And he started complaining that he would see ghosts. And the mother and father felt that, he was either hallucinating, imagining, or something. But by this time, they had discovered the fact that it was a funeral home. The tables were still there, all the instruments were there, the chain hoist was there. And of course, when they confronted the landlord, he said, well, there's nothing to worry about. I mean, it's not a funeral home anymore. But what these people went through was horrendous. There would be physical attacks to the extent that I was sitting there one night, and I felt as though I was being jabbed by a long needle, almost like these wool needles, what do they call them?
A knitting needle?
Like a knitting needle.
And the pain was terrible. And actual rapes took place of both women that were there. One was a young niece.
A niece that Carmen had her niece, Tony, living with her. Now, when you say that there was more than one type of spirit in this house, you were right. It all started out looking like there could have been human spirits. They would see human spirits. Even our researchers witnessed human spirits. But there was something altogether different. Besides that human element, there was something inhuman or very, very negative.
Now, you guys said their women were attacked. You're saying physically raped? How did that happen? How did that work?
Well, actually, in this case, both the niece and Carmen and her husband, Al, all were raped in this house.
So
that was the most...
Denise was the first one to start complaining about feeling something sexual happening to her.
Well, the night that... Let me go back to that very first night that I took the phone call in the middle of the night, Tony. I took a phone call in the middle of the night from a...
What was it like for you to relive this experience?
You mean from the beginning?
Well, basically, you know, when James came to you and said he was going to make this film, and then the whole experience of talking to Vera and Patrick,
Yes.
and then watching it.
Well, just to, you know, the last time when I was out there on the coast, well, I'm out here on the coast again, but
different coast.
Yes. I sat next to you. There was children coming and asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I realized how I could speak to you. You know, you weren't somebody way, way, way up here. That you were a down-to-earth person that I could explain things to. Because my psychic ability, that is nothing that I had control over. I had no control over it at all. I was educated in private Catholic girls' schools, and there's no such thing as anything like this happening. And I kept going to confession. I would go to confession and confess that I was sinning. And then I was with this Jesuit priest. Said, "That's not a sin." He says, "That's you." "Why me?" He says, I can't give you that answer, and you're never going to have the answer." "I'm never going to?" He says, "Yes, you have to. You'll learn to live with it and control it." I live with it, but you don't control it.
Yeah. James, for you to take on this, you know, this story and to tell it, and to have Lorraine there, you know, wow, how amazing was that for you?
It was amazing. I've been a big fan of Lorraine's for a while. Growing up, you know, I've seen, you know, I've read stories and seen, you know, certain movies that were based on cases that Lorraine and Ed had investigated. And when the time came, when this project came along, I had just finished Insidious, and I wanted to get back into studio filmmaking, and this was like the perfect project for me to get back into it with. You know, the chance to take what I've honed over the years as a filmmaker, and you know, and bring it to this particular movie, and you know, and to do, you know, justice to the story of the Warrens, and also the parents as well, that are the other set of family that are involved in this film.
Was there ever a time where you both decided you wanted to go back to that house?
The real house?
Mm-hmm.
Not with me, no.
You and I.
Not with me.
You and I, let's say both. It follows you. What was there follows you. It was very negative. Very, very negative home. It really drained everything out of you to go in that house.
Yeah, it was less scary to just build a set of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The casting, phenomenal. Really, like Lily, boy, did she ever take a beating. Vera, to play you, you know, how much time did you spend with Vera and Patrick, I guess, to just, you know, let them know what was really going on in yours and Ed's life?
You mean why we were investigating, or?
Oh, no, when Vera and Patrick were cast.
Oh, yes.
You obviously had to spend some time, and you know, how did you, you know, fill them in on what happened and get them to really know how you felt and what you went through? You had to have been a huge help to them.
Well, I don't know how to really approach that. You know, I don't have the answer for you on that. You have to help people to understand things. You have to do it in pieces, you know, like you were for a child, like you were trying to explain something to a child, because the normal person, imagine going through this. Just imagine going through it. You know, it's horrible. It's very, very terrifying, and that house was very, very bad. It was bad.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I wouldn't want to go there.
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't.
No, not even.
No.
Like, it was scary enough for me to watch this movie.
I know Vera was very interested in playing the role of Lorraine.
Yes,
and
I like her.
She's, well, you know, it's like, it's great to be played by one of the classiest, most beautiful actresses out there.
Yeah, and she is beautiful, and she's a
talented
beautiful person.
That's it.
Yes.
She's an amazing person,
Mhm.
and I know that you know, when Vera first came on this project, we talked a lot about, you know, how we were going to approach her character, her you know, her depiction of Lorraine, and you know, and she was very adamant too about wanting to, you know, be true to Lorraine, and she wanted to bring all the character, you know, all the character quirks that Lorraine has, you know, all the things that make you who you are, that make you real. And so she didn't just want to portray one side. She wanted to kind of, like, you know, really flesh her out. And Patrick did the same thing as well. And so it was really great. I mean, like, I feel very fortunate to have these really great actors in there with me to come along on this journey and make this film.
How do you make a scare so easily? You are a master. He's a master at this, don't you think? I mean, what is your secret?
Yes,
How do
you are.
What is it in your little brain there, James, that makes us like
You're
just
a
so?
I don't think it's too much.
No, and I think very facetious here. He's amazing at
There's
this
something
stuff.
wrong with his brain.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. You do such a good job.
Like, seriously, people do ask me this a lot. I don't have a secret. I tell them, you know, I just try to put on screen whatever things that I find scary. You know, things that I'm creeped out by. And you know, usually people say to me, "Oh, James, you make these kind of films. You must not be afraid of them." I'm like, no, quite the contrary. I'm quite a chicken. I'm a wuss. Okay.
Call it the way it is.
Yes, I get frightened very easily, and I think because of that, I can channel it and put it into my film, and I think that is my way of dealing with it. I find it therapeutic.
Yeah, you must. Oh, wow,
Yes.
it's just such a great job. I have to ask you quickly about your museum and all the artifacts that you had in the house when you were younger, and you still have this. How on earth did you live in a house having all that stuff there?
It's not in my house, honey. It's not in my home. My home, all right, let me explain. My home is on a couple of levels, and you go down to the lowest level. It's one big room, another bath, another my office, and is on that. Then there's a passageway that goes partly underground and then partly out to the museum. And you go out that way. It's blessed by, I can't even tell you how many blessings. I mean, I'm Catholic, and it's had but a lot, even rabbis have been in there, and blessings.
Well, that's good to know, because, man, I'd be very scared to live with all that stuff.
You know, yes, you have to be. You have to be aware. You know, it's nothing that you see. It's nothing sometimes that you hear. But you know. You know. You go, especially when you go down the passageway. No.
Well, God bless you both. My goodness, what an amazing film. You've done such a wonderful job. I can't wait for Insidious 2. Oh, my God. I'm already freaking about that. And what a pleasure to meet you. You're such a lovely lady, and best of luck to both of you. Thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my heartfelt pleasure and honor to welcome Lorraine Warren. Good evening, everyone. I can't even begin to tell you what pleasure I get from being here this evening. It is really an honor. What a friendly group of people. My God. You're wonderful. God, I'd like to take you home with me. Our work, Ed and myself, has entailed numerous investigations. Ed grew up in a home that was horribly haunted. There were never answers for why it was so haunted. why the clergy were there so many times, but there was never, ever closure. When Ed got out of the military, we were married during the war. Ed became a war hero when his ship went down in the North Atlantic, and he was one of only just a very few men. I think there were 60 of them that survived where the two ships collided in February that year in the North Atlantic during wartime conditions. He never ever got over that. He never got over the screams of the people. And he saved the life of one man, and as a result of it, became a war hero. We were married on survivor's leave. Ed never talked in the early years about the things that occurred in that house. We didn't talk about them. When he came home from service, our daughter had already been born. In fact, Judy was born when Ed was in Japan. Before Ed passed away, we had returned to Japan. We had returned to the same area where Ed, as a naval gunner who was stationed in Nagoya, Japan, there was no naval base, but he lived with MacArthur's army. It was really very emotional for him to return to this area. They took us to right where he had his office and port directors and all. He stood with me. It was an emotional thing. I wanted to look out at the Pacific as he could see it. I wanted to stand where he stood when he was told that our daughter was born. And as we did, it was just the most beautiful thing. But Ed collapsed soon after we came home. He collapsed, and he was given 24 hours to live. It was an unbearable thing for me and our family to go through. But I decided that although he was a full care patient and really was never going to really come back to the boy that he was, the man that he was, I brought him home and took care of him. It's the most beautiful thing you can ever do for someone you love. When he passed, I thought, how can I think of myself as someone who could take on that responsibility of being involved in this area of work, of doing the investigations, of doing the lectures at the universities? How could I possibly think that I could take that on? I know that our son-in-law, Tony Spera, who works with me and is with me tonight, has worked with us for well over 25 years. But to take on a responsibility like that was really overwhelming to me. But I felt if it was meant to be, I was going to know. And what happened was beautiful. It was 13 days after Ed passed. I was on the back deck of our home. I could look across, and our land then drops where the gazebo is, and on the other side is the reservoir and a mountain. I could see the leaves beginning to change on the trees, and I said, honey, wherever you are, I hope you can see these leaves changing. I know how you loved the fall of the year. And with this, the phone rang. And I picked up, I had the phone next to me on the table, and it was a man by the name of Teddy Tannenbaum who had written a script on our life for Warner Brothers. He was very emotional, and said to me, this is always the hardest thing when I go to tell this. He said, for a man who was so brilliant where his work was concerned, he had such a sense of humor. I said something back to him that was in no way related to what he said to me. I said, Teddy, I always knew when Ed was at peace and Ed was happy if I heard him whistle. And he got very emotional, and we closed that conversation. The next morning was Ed's birthday. He died just 2 weeks before his birthday. I went to Mass and Communion for him, and then went over to his graveside. The monument wasn't there yet. And I said to him, honey, I know what we'd be doing if you were here today. You would wake up first, always, and you would say to me, get up, get dressed, we're going to our favorite place for breakfast, and it's my tree. And it's the Bluebird on Route 58 in Easton, Connecticut. So with that, I said, honey, we're going there today, and it's my tree. I went to the Bluebird. When I got there, there was a new little waitress. I spoke with her and asked for a particular table that we always use. And I gave my order, but I said, it's only me eating. If my husband were here, this is where we'd be celebrating his breakfast on his birthday. She said, oh my God, how sad. A woman came out, one of the owners, and said, are you Mrs. Warren? I said, yes. And she said, we have a problem here. I said, I never knew of any problems here all the time we've been coming, but I did not know her. And so she said to me, the dishwasher, that's how it started. The dishwasher, she said, he came in early this morning. I says, how early? She says, 5 o'clock. And she said, he phoned me and told me he was terrified and he was going home. And I told him not to go home. I told him to take the phone and go into the dining rooms, the 2 dining rooms. And I said, look out the window. Do you see anything? Do you hear anything? I said, what did he see and what did he hear? She said, he claimed to hear a man whistling. So with this, I said, could I please speak to him? I can read your aura. That is really one of the reasons I do so much where the police work is concerned, because I can always tell if someone is lying to me or telling fibs or not telling the truths. So he sat across from me, and I...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Spera, along with special guest Addie and Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren. Tonight, Addie is going to talk about a haunting that occurred to her in her home that she had lived in previously for about 15 years. Suddenly, phenomena began to occur, and she'll tell us all about it tonight, and she had to call in the Warrens, of course. I think what I'd like to start out, before I talk to Addie, thanks for coming on, Addie, is to ask Lorraine and Ed about the house itself, to set up how you got the call and what happened in the home prior to you going in.
Well, Addie had contacted us and told us about phenomena that was occurring in this home. At that time, Addie was running it as a bed and breakfast. It's a beautiful old home, beautiful furnishings, and told us about things that were occurring, not just to her, her 2 children, and her husband, but also to people who would be guests in the home. They would hear the knocking, they would hear the rapping, they would hear the footsteps in the home. The home is a very old home, extremely old home. And Tony, it's not only is it an old home, but it's also on a very old route going through an area in the Litchfield Hills.
How old is the home?
1809.
1909?
1809.
1809, Tony.
Okay, so it's like 100 and whatever, 80 years
Right,
old or 185.
and they were renovating it back to its original. All of it, the stripping, the wallpaper, they were doing a great deal. Many times we know that when you start to do things where you're making renovations in a home, that is enough to trigger off spirit phenomena. Where a ghost or someone had once been able to walk through a doorway in a certain area, and now that doorway no longer exists. And with Addie, many changes had taken place in this home.
Plus the fact that she had a couple of daughters too, children.
No, she has a boy and a girl.
A boy and a girl.
Yeah, she has a boy and a girl.
What do you think then spawned this occurrence?
Well, I think what gave it the energy, I think the renovations in the house, I think the fact of the energy from the 2 children would be enough for the spirit phenomena to feed off from and enable it to become manifest to the extent that it did.
But I believe that things were happening there before you even moved in, right?
Oh, yes.
Because you had got statements from people.
The house had been haunted for a history of well over 30 years before we bought the house. When we were looking at the house with the real estate agent, we noticed that there were 2 staircases, and one of the doorways leading up to the front staircase had been nailed shut. And no one had lived on the 2nd floor for 30 years.
That's not good.
One of the windows of the bedroom was broken, and vines had grown in through the window and all throughout the whole bedroom.
So nobody ever went up there?
No one did, except in 1955, there was a great flood in the Torrington area, and these people had taken in people from the Torrington area, friends of theirs, 40 of them, and let them live on the 2nd floor. These people had no place to go, and after a week, they came downstairs, they all left, they fled. They said there was something on the 2nd floor that didn't want them up there, and they left. And other phenomena happened, but we didn't know about it at the time when we bought the house. They sold it to us without telling us about that. So we got a bargain. We got a beautiful federal colonial, 1809, 44 acres for $60,000.
Wow. How many acres?
44.
44 acres.
And what year did you buy the home?
Bought it 20 years ago.
So like 1976, 77?
My God.
It was a very good price.
I'll give her $45,000 now.
You're right.
Well, we were wondering what was wrong with the house. My husband went through it thoroughly and couldn't find anything structurally wrong with the house. And we moved in.
Your husband's a carpenter, right?
An engineer, but he worked his way through college as a carpenter. We moved into the house and we had a big argument. I told him, I said, stop leaving the doors open. You're letting the dogs out. He said, I'm not leaving the doors open. He said, you're leaving the doors open. Wow. And this argument went back and forth, and then he pointed to the back door. He said, I can lock this door, turn my back on it in this room, then turn around, and this door's open. And so that night, we went around and we locked up every window, every door in the house, and as we went to bed, my husband said, I feel that we're locking something in with us. We're not locking something out. And then that morning, we got up and we came downstairs. Every door was open, every door. And the dogs were out on the lawn, and we became hysterical. We didn't know what was opening the doors. We couldn't understand what was happening in the house.
It had to be somebody from inside then, right?
Oh, without a doubt. We realized there was something in the house with us.
How long after you moved in did this start?
Immediately.
Immediately?
Immediately. We bought it during the summer. We were getting into fall. It was getting colder. We didn't know what was happening. And I just remember one day I just stood in the dining room and I said, I don't know who's opening the doors, but if you don't stop, I'll go next door, because we do live next door to a Catholic church. And I said, I'll bring a priest over and I'll have him bless the house. And then the doors stayed closed, but we had other phenomena that happened. We had footsteps up in our attic, and it was terrifying. We could just hear a heavy footsteps going back and forth, and my
Was it
husband.
like a heavy man?
Yes,
I remember
very
that. I remember
loud,
that.
even steps.
When was it? Like in the daytime or at nighttime?
Daytime, nighttime, but up in the attic. And my husband would insist on going up there, and I would beg him not to go up there, and we'd never find anything up there.
And sometimes you got to beg him to go up there.
Well, he was pretty fearless about making confrontations with it. I was terrified. I was beginning to realize that it wasn't a person we were dealing with. In his mind, he was still hoping to find a person that he could attribute this to, because after we bought the house, we did have people come back. They thought it still belonged to the previous owners, and we had to change the locks, and so we were finding real people in the house, and he was hoping he was going to find a child or a kid breaking into the house.
Trying to think logically.
Yes, yes. We always tried to base all the problems on the house to something in reality first. We would have the piano play, and we would run into the library, and it would stop, and we would think, well, maybe the cat walked across it, but it sounded like classical music. How could the cat do that? We had loud, explosive noises in the house, followed by breaking glass, and we could find no explanation for those either, and we thought, well, maybe there's an underground...
You didn't find no broken glass either, right?
We thought maybe there's an underground cave, and then my husband thought, well, maybe we're going through a time warp or something. We never really thought about...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony Sparrow, along with hosts Ed and Lorraine Warren, and we also have a special guest with us tonight, Mr. John Zaffis, a psychic researcher who's been investigating areas of the supernatural for over 20 years. If you've been with us in previous programs, you're well aware of some of the haunting phenomena that we've spoke about, some of the evil entities that we've talked about, demonic spirits, things of a preternatural nature, an evil, bad nature, very bad. But tonight we thought we'd take a little different turn and talk about something beautiful, something very, very lovely, and something that you, the audience, will enjoy. Tonight we're going to be speaking about spirits of the woods, elemental type spirits, spirits also known as gnomes, sprites, salamanders. When you think of a leprechaun, for instance, in Ireland, those kind of spirits. When you think of a magical, mystical place, I don't know about you, but I think of England, Scotland, Ireland, the mystical isles. Tonight we'll be bringing you there with Ed and Lorraine Warren's help, and speaking of some beautiful entities that they've witnessed, they've followed throughout the world. It's going to be a beautiful program tonight, and we welcome you. And we're going to begin the program with Ed. Ed, we'd like to start, if we could, about Scotland and England and about the fairies.
You know, Tony, a lot of people, when you talk about such things as elementals, fairies, you can see that little grin come on their face, you know. No such thing. But in fact, there are many such type fairies. You have, as you said, the gnomes, which we have a statue of right here. These are well known in such places, especially Germany. Germany, England, Scotland, Wales. And we have encountered them on the moors of Ireland, Scotland, and England. Many people, in fact. I am particularly fond of one place, a fairy glen, which we're going to show many pictures of. And this is in Scotland. It's in northwest Scotland on the Isle of Skye, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Once you go there, you always return. Isn't that right, Tony?
Yes,
you always
I've
return.
been there. I love it.
Because what you're seeing is a peninsula of land going out into the North Sea. High mountains, snow-capped sometimes, and all around you is the North Sea, and the next stop is the North Pole. And in this mystical land, we have encountered elemental spirits, fairies. You don't always see them, but you know that they're there. Lorraine, of course, has seen them clairvisually, has heard them. She's even heard the fairy music, which is on the fairy bridge. The fairy bridge is a well-known area by the Scottish people because it is part of their history. About 500 years ago, one of the MacLeods, a Lord MacLeod of Dunvegan Castle, had actually married one of the wee people. Now, when I say wee people, this one was probably about 3.5 or 4 foot high. And of course, we know in those days, normal people weren't much bigger. They rarely went over 5'7" or 5'8". So he wasn't exactly a giant to her. They did get married. A mystical wedding took place, but after about 5 years, they felt that they just couldn't make a go of it. They were from 2 different worlds. Now, he left her on what they call the Fairy Bridge, which is still there today. But as they parted, she gave him the fairy flag, which remnants of it are still at Dunvegan Castle. You can still see this fairy flag that she gave him. She told him that if ever the castle were in need of help because of it being overtaken by some enemy, fly the flag, and 3 times it would be saved. They flew that flag twice already. Twice it was saved from being besieged. They still can use that fairy flag one more time. And as I said, you know, Scottish children, historians, all believe very firmly in the fairy world. I'll be talking about an encounter that I had personally later on in the show, which took place right here in the United States. In fact, again on a very mystical mountain, not far from where you live, Tony. And it's up near Boston, a small village. And Granville Forest, New Boston.
New Boston,
and Granville Village is right at the top of the mountain. And I'll tell that story after. But first I'd like to show these people out here, our audience, some beautiful pictures that we've taken on the Isle of Skye. And they'll see a sunset going down. It only gets dark for about 45 minutes there, you know, as you know. And then, of course, the sun comes up again.
I think, Tony, while we were in England and Scotland this time, a magazine that I always pick up on there, which is very lovely, which is Country Living, similar to what we have in our own country. But they are so open regarding the fact of anything of a spiritual nature, ghosts, haunted houses. It isn't a taboo subject either in any magazines or literary works or even in general conversation with the people who live there. So I read this, Away with the Fairies. No one knows for sure or who or what fairies might be. Talks to believers and skeptics who think they have pretty good ideas. Fairies favor borderline states of mind, just as they prefer all boundaries. Twilight, midnight, Midsummer's Eve, Halloween, crossroads, and seashores.
The first time I was introduced to the fairy world, I probably was about 11 years old, was taken to a movie to see Midsummer's Eve. I will never forget it. It was movies like this that were instrumental in generating my interest in the supernatural. This goes way back, of course. We're talking maybe 50-some years.
Sparrow. Welcome to another edition of Secrets of the Supernatural. Tonight, we have a very special program. Tonight we have a gentleman, special guest, that actually had an encounter with what we refer to as the White Lady of Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut. His name is Rod Vesey. He's an eyewitness to the White Lady and to another spirit that actually visited him in his vehicle on the way home one night from work. I'd like to start out with Ed and Lorraine and then get to Rod. This is a very exciting program. You're going to love it tonight. Ed, can you just fill us in really quick on the White Lady?
The White Lady has often been seen in and around Union Graveyard, Route 59, and as far over as Stepney Graveyard in Monroe. But we've been getting reports for the past 20-some years of people who claim that they've seen a lady in white going along, you know, on the road out there in the cemetery. And Lorraine and I decided that since all these reports were coming in, that we would investigate it. And I stayed in that graveyard for 7 nights. I'd leave the house around midnight. I'd go to the graveyard in my van, park the van, and I'd open up the doors. It was hot. It was July, August. Actually, this was August.
Yeah, it was the end of July.
I'd open up the van and sit back, and I'd see all these ghost lights floating all over the place. And I thought, sooner or later, something's going to happen. And on September 1st of 1990, I believe it was, at
2:40 in the morning, you
2:40
told
in the
me.
morning, that's right. I'm sitting there, and I could see all these lights over near the Baptist cemetery, all around the stone wall, and all these thousands and millions of insects were just chirping away. All of a sudden, things started to quiet down, and I could hear what sounded like a woman weeping. I picked up my camera. I had a camcorder alongside of me, and I had the tripod set up outside. I didn't want to leave the camera out there because of the humidity. I took the camera out, and I could see all these ghost lights suddenly forming into a figure of a woman. Now, the film that I took of this spirit looks as though it's very far away. Actually, it was very close to me. It wasn't that very far away. And I put the camera up to my eye, and I let it go, and I couldn't see anything. I took my eye away, and I could see her. I immediately put the camera on the tripod and let it run, and I started to walk toward her as she was coming towards me, and she disappeared. Now, I knew I shouldn't do that, so I backed up again, and she came back into focus. At that point, she started to come towards me, moving through the tombstones, and these black things, which I can only describe as looking like kind of like black poodles, were jumping up against her. We call these here wood ghosts or shadow ghosts. And they were trying to stop her from getting to me. Now, all this is taking place, you understand, in just a minute or two. And then she moves towards me and moves away, and this huge shadow ghost pushed her towards Route 59, and that was it. I packed up the camera real quick. I ran home in the car. I ran home. I drove home. I woke Lorraine up, and I said, "You're not going to believe what happened." We put it on the VCR, and there it was. I had captured it. Now, understand that this is something that I had been looking forward to for 50 years. I had seen pictures taken of ghosts, photographs taken of ghosts. I had seen ghosts, but I had never had a video camera with me and the opportunity to get this on film, which I did. Now, Rod Vesey's experience was different than mine, and I'll let Rod tell that one.
Okay, Rod?
When I had my experience with the White Lady, I think it was a month or two before you got her on film. I was coming home from work. I was working in Fairfield at the time, and it was about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm driving home. I'd just gotten off of work. I was wide awake, all wound up, and got up to Sport Hill Road and 59 where it crosses. There was a slight mist on the road. The road was a little damp and, you know, fog about maybe a foot high, which wasn't unusual for the area. Got up, came up the hill a little bit, and as I came up the hill coming up past the cemetery, I felt like someone was on my right side. And I looked over, and there was a person, just like Ed, sitting here, that solid, sitting there. He had on a little brown scrunched up hat, a little scruff on his face. At the time, I had no hair on my face. I was clean shaving at the time. So it definitely wasn't my reflection in the window. I did one of those, looked forward, looked back. That figure was gone, and in front of me, I'd say a good 60, 70 feet in front of me, there was a woman standing in the road. I tapped on the brakes. I didn't jam them on because the road was a little slick. And as soon as I tapped on the brakes, she went from about 70 feet out to right in front of the car, and the thing that I remember the most was her hand came up in a motion like that, like up and that way, sort of like she was not trying to grab me, but she was reaching out. And that figure, it didn't visually come right through the car, but it went through my car. If you could understand that, if you take your hand and wave it past your head, you feel a little breeze.
You felt the breeze.
It felt like. I don't know if I physically felt a breeze, but I felt something go by me.
Like a whoosh, like kind of thing?
Exactly. And that, after that happened, I looked in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me, and in front of me, the road turned like a deep cranberry red, just my lane of the road. Now, that's up at the top, right across from the cemetery, and as you go back down the hill, there's an Episcopal church down there. When I got to that church, everything had disappeared. Got home, was all shaken up, woke my wife Pamela up, explained everything to her, and I was really nervous. I have two children, Kaylin and Marissa, at home, that I thought, you know, God, what if this thing followed me home? Is it going to be after my children?
You're concerned.
It was,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. My name is Tony Spera. I'll be your moderator tonight, as I have in all past shows. Tonight we're going to be speaking about something truly horrific, truly amazing. We're going to be talking about the most haunted location in all of Great Britain. The location I'm speaking about, Borley Rectory. A rectory right outside a small town of Long Melford in England, which was built in 1863 by the Reverend Henry Bull. I've been there. I've visited that location on several occasions. The Warrens, however, Ed and Lorraine, have been there over 24 times. Every single time they've been there, they've been witness to phenomena. It is, in fact, the most haunted location in all of Great Britain. What I'd like to do now is start with Ed and Lorraine and ask about your first experience at Borley.
The first experience for me was phenomenal. It was really phenomenal. It's about the only place, Tony, other than going into a home where poltergeist activity is prominent, that everything happens as soon as you get involved. As soon as you walk in, as soon as you get involved in going into this church and beginning your research, something is bound to happen. Now, that first day, I had a very skeptical researcher with me. He was a newspaper man from Danbury, and he was obnoxiously skeptical. But he was keeping a full diary for me, so he was very, very helpful. I worried about what his effect was going to have on this building. So I was in and I was discerning. I was standing down by the altar. I was with a group of people, and I was discerning. When all of a sudden, he came charging in through the back door, and he said, "Something is hitting me. It's hitting me. It's hitting me." And he was absolutely hysterical. It was hysterical. Now, at that point, he said, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe."
Now, Lorraine, was this researcher psychic by any chance?
No,
he wasn't
by no means. Oh, by no.
He had never been in a haunted area.
He had never been to a haunted area, Tony.
Okay.
And the recorders are on because people are recording what I'm discerning. Now, later at our hotel in London, he came down to my room and said, "Mrs. Warren, it's going to be impossible for me to write anything about that church that we were in." I said, "Borley?" He said, "Yes." He said, "The tape that you gave me where you were discerning," he said, "you can hear when I come in the room, and I'd like to play it for you." Now, when he are into the church, now when he walked in and he was yelling like that, a voice, a woman's voice, as he said, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," said, hit him, almost in a healing way. And you hear her very gentle voice.
Now, this is a spirit voice that she's talking about.
Now, this was the first day. Now, when I was leaving the church, I knew something about the background of it. That's why we were drawn there. I knew that there was a nun that was buried in the walls of the building. I knew her remains had been found and that it was buried at a graveyard very close in Liston Churchyard. I knew all about that. So I said, maybe before we go back to London, see, this is about 45 minutes outside of London, as you remember, Tony.
Right.
And I said, maybe we should go to Liston first. It was a bitter cold night. This was in January.
What year was this?
1976. And so we went to Liston, and the photographer who I had with me, he was froze. We were all froze. But something told me to have him get out and snap some pictures. We really got outstanding psychic photographs at Liston. In fact, Tony, in our book, The Demonologist, it tells about that particular day when I went there for the first time, and it shows the psychic photograph where you see a stone that forms a cross, and it's glowing. It's glowing as if you had bright lights on it. And no lights, of course, were on it at all. It's in a very, very rural area.
I have to tell you that this particular house, the most haunted house in England, which was written by Harry Price, he was your very earliest of Ghostbusters, very famous man. That I was in the Navy, I was 17 years old, I picked up a book on a ship, and there it was, the most haunted house in England. Well, since I lived in a haunted house as a boy, I was intrigued. And I said to myself, if ever I come back again to England, I've got to visit that house. And we did. And every year Lorraine and I visit it. And the first time that Lorraine and I went together was the following year.
No, the following May, honey.
So I said,
Yes.
the following year.
Yeah.
1976.
76. Yes, 76,
And-
the same year.
And we went with two young women who were clairvoyants. Actually, one was a psychic photographer, the other was a clairvoyant. And I'll never forget that night. We had to get permission to go into the church. So who did I send up? Lorraine. She goes up to the caretakers, and she knocks on the door. I'll never forget it. A woman comes out, and I thought, she's not going to get us in. But then I knew that her Irish charm would do it. All of a sudden, she comes out, she's holding this big key up in her hand.
Great big key like this, Tony.
So I said, okay, we'll come back after 10 o'clock at night. Now, as you know, Tony, in England, it gets dark very late. As the further north you go up, it's very light until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So when we got up there, it was already getting twilight. It was pretty dark. We had a nice dinner at this very old inn where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had eaten. He had also investigated the
I remember you took me there.
Yes, the
So we go over there, and I'll never forget putting the key into that ancient door.